When Lord Voldemort was clear-headed, his mind was razor-sharp. He had talent, charisma, and a ruthless intelligence. His current followers weren't brilliant. If they had been, they wouldn't have been so easily deceived, captured, and left to be eaten hollow by Dementors in Asgam for over a decade. But even this motley crew could be extremely effective under his direction. In a matter of weeks, they smashed and absorbed the local black markets and loose bands of dark wizards in Norway. The Nordic wizarding communities were small, only a few thousand in countries like Norway and Sweden, and perhaps because of their proximity to the Arctic, the witches and wizards there tended toward isolation. They were socially reclusive, anxious about attention, and generally reluctant to step into the spotlight. Their institutions were thinly organized, communications were sporadic, and the idea of a fully operational Ministry of Magic never really took hold. Usually some ad hoc, more official body handled what needed handling, and they stayed out of international affairs. They didn't go to the Quidditch World Cup or the Triwizard Tournament. At most, a few outgoing individuals might have watched a broadcast on the ideal land. Against that background, the Death Eaters from Britain, seasoned, aggressive, and used to operating in a bustling, magical society, were unstoppable. They planted themselves as aristocratic personae, used pure-blood wealth to buy social standing, and began to socialize their way into the local upper circles. Those who liked socializing often held local offices. Those who didn't rarely did. In short order, they occupied posts in the official wizarding organizations and began political careers. In 2 months, roughly a third of Norway's wizarding infrastructure was under Voldemort's thumb. By the time Ted warned Dumbledore that Voldemort might be operating in Norway, several Death Eaters were already holding important positions. Facing an organization that had come from the heart of a magically rich Britain, the locals had simply lacked the means to resist. If anyone resisted, Voldemort could always invite them to experience the killing curse that night. His reputation for violence was a powerful recruiting tool. It was an international problem now, and Dumbledore, as honorary chairman of the International Confederation of Wizards, had to take notice. Ted and his companions had already left Sweden. Passing through France, Fleur Delacour had pressed them to stay with her for a few days. By then she had realized that someone had brazenly taken her home without observing the usual courtesies, and she dropped any pretense of being a proper lady. Hermione, never slow to read a situation, realized Fleur had caught on, and also feared Fleur might try to steal something of her own. She acted fast. With a tug and a flash of green flame, they were off through the flue. Fleur laughed it off in classic French fashion. "Silly girl," she said. "For a man, a cultivated flower can never outshine a wild one. Pursuing someone is only a veil away from winning him. As long as the hoe is wielded well, any corner can be turned." A witch from a city of romance, she understood these games intimately. Hermione rolled her eyes but kept them moving. This was one fight she wasn't going to let Fleur win. Back at Hermione's home, the group divvied up the spoils, the handful of magical creatures they'd recovered. 2 artificial beasts were left to the Swedish wizards who had found them. Creatures like bowtruckles and a mooncalf were given to Hagrid. Hermione wanted to keep the 3 nifflers. Ted warned her straight. "They're trouble. They love shiny things and have a pouch with a spatial effect. Leave them unwatched and half your house will end up in a pouch. One will clean out a whole street if you're not careful." The 3 nifflers sat in their cage with innocent, wide-eyed looks as if to say, "We've never done anything wrong." Hermione hugged Meow Meow, her orange cat, which had recently started showing unexpected talents. It had thickened, the coin-shaped mark on its brow glowing more and more. "The smartest Meow Meow in the world will keep them in line, right?" she murmured. "Meow." The mattress-sized cat agreed in principle. To calm them, Hermione released the nifflers and gave them 2 shiny glass balls. They'd never seen such perfectly made clear glass and instantly started scrapping over them, pulling tails, biting legs, and tumbling in a ball that rolled off the bed onto the floor. "2 peaches kill 3 warriors," Ted quipped, delighted with the solution. Hermione scolded, "Stop it, don't fight." But the nifflers paid her no mind until Meow Meow intervened. With 3 swift, heavy swats, the cat imposed total dominance. Meow Meow's weight and strength were overwhelming. The Nifflers sat in stunned submission. Ted still fitted them each with small silver collars, a tightening hoop charm he'd adapted from goblin control devices, so Hermione could restrain them with a simple spell when needed. Ted made them in his spare time, small practical upgrades to old ideas. Mrs. Granger insisted Ted stay for dinner. He ate, and then there was the usual mother-daughter chat. "Hermione, what is it, Mum? Why is there only one umbrella left?" Hermione stammered some half-truth about using it for balloons and left it at that. Back in Britain, Ted reached out to his friends. He posted on the magic net and gathered the Hogwarts Savior Squad in Diagon Alley. Harry, Ron, Neville, and Jerry pinged back quickly. Harry curious, Ron joking about money-making, Neville looking to buy seeds, Jerry complaining about beasts running wild. Ted had picked up a few valuable cards and trinkets in his travels and wanted to distribute them where they'd do the most good. He gave Neville a lazuli glintstone sword, blue. Neville often turned his wand into a sword in the middle of a fight and fidgeted whenever he had to choose between wand and blade. With this sword, he could have a real one-handed weapon that conducted magic flawlessly, like a wand shaft of its own. The glintstone sword could infuse and reshape magic, emitting sword chi and serving as a conduit for new techniques. It had real potential. He passed a witch job card, incomplete blue, to Harry, thinking the hybrid melee mage or summoner archetype would suit him. He gave Jerry an armor break, blue card, a skill that could break defenses. Jerry had trouble with heavily armored opponents, and a high-powered armor penetration ability could let even a small weapon cut through a giant beast. Ted returned to his own research. The Book of Seals had been calling to him. He began studying water-based spells to see if he could reconstruct the water release effect. He was making headway when Professor McGonagall contacted him. Hogwarts had suddenly been deluged with first years. "I don't know what's happened this year," she fretted. "Acceptances have exploded. We've already sent out over 100 letters." McGonagall handled so much of Hogwarts administration that a surge like this stretched the staff thin. Normally, 40 or 50 first years were expected. This time, there were at least 70 Muggle-born students alone. Professors were running themselves ragged making home visits. Ted pitched in for a couple of days and saw with his own eyes how the world was changing. The ripples were beginning to affect long-established social rules. Before the dust settled, another story hit the magic net. A valuable, otherworld, magical document had leaked. It supposedly came from a newly appeared mountain in Switzerland where half-orcs, trolls, and cave networks had been found. Muggle soldiers, with wizarding support, had cleared out hundreds of orcs and searched the caverns. They found strange cold weapons, faintly magical and exquisitely crafted, and jewelry and metals of unknown origin. In one cave, a young wizard had found a document carved on a wall beside a skeleton and taken a rubbing. A dispute over ownership between the Muggle forces and the wizard party turned into a leak. Too many hands had seen the rubbing. Scholars and those with an aptitude for deciphering ancient texts soon translated the content. It was a manual on forging magical rings. Not just decorative rings, but rings of power, enchanted rings of the elven tradition. They were allegedly stronger than most wands, each carrying unique properties, techniques that elven smiths had inherited from their gods. Ted's mind lit up. Rings of power. All at once he saw the stakes. If elven ring-forging knowledge had somehow crossed into their world, it could change everything. He thought of Sauron and Celebrimbor, of the 19 rings, 3 for elves, 7 for dwarves, 9 for men, and the one ring that was different, that had fused itself to Sauron's essence. Whether this leak was blessing or curse, it was dangerous knowledge. Ted didn't have to go far to find it. Someone had shared the document on the ideal land for him. The manual was valuable, but it had a high threshold. You needed advanced alchemy and spellcraft, rare materials, and techniques that would eliminate most wizards at the first hurdle. Still, Ted's interest was piqued. The more difficult the craft, the more he wanted to try. 2 weeks after returning from Sweden, the group gathered at the burrow. It was open space, comfortable for testing new abilities. Neville cradled the glintstone sword like a treasure. He finally stopped worrying about what others thought and threw himself into studying magical swordsmanship. He had already begun to temper the blade with his holy light breathing method, and the result was striking. The sword glittered with golden, holy light. When infused with magic, it could extend a slashing blade of holy light over 3 meters long and reshape the auxiliary holy magic it carried. Showy, perhaps, but terrifyingly effective. "Don't go all Blade of Severance on us, Neville," Ted teased. "No Bankai, just from a dream." Ron didn't get a single artifact for himself, but everyone's discoveries and progress were shared. He'd been working on his magic mecha and now incorporated Neville's magic shaping techniques into its design, giving the machine stronger transformations. Harry's magic release rigging went into the weapon system, and Ron produced a magic energy gun, a pistol over a meter long that, when charged for a second, hummed and fired a deep blue, condensed bolt. One shot at a distant hill left a 3-meter wide, 1-meter deep crater. He also modified the summoning spell for convenience. He had Ted craft a circular magic emblem. When thrown, it would draw its own summoning circle. With a chant, "Burpo Mo Salamu, Flash Magic King," the summoning would complete. The modified magic energy mecha, Prototype 1, rose from the summoning circle and loomed into the late afternoon air, humming with potential. Chapter 368. The Bloodmore. Ron grinned like a proud inventor as the first machine rose from the summoning circle, 8 or 9 meters of gleaming metal and gears. He looked ready to celebrate, nearly doing a few somersaults in place. The machine already had 3 core modes and 6 or 7 external attachments. By Ron's count, that meant over a dozen tactical configurations to handle different enemies and situations. "I can't even use them all," he crowed to himself. "I simply can't use them all. Ha!" His gloating barely lasted a few minutes. Harry moved. She demonstrated everything she'd learned since becoming a wizard and the ways she'd adapted that knowledge into power. Wizard's grip. A deep purple, smoky, long-nailed magical hand appeared, slender and uncanny, and closed around a tree as thick as a bowl. With a sickening crunch, the tree snapped out of the ground. Azure Holy Fist! A giant blue magic fist, easily 3 meters across, materialized and struck through the air with a wind that shredded saplings and splintered another tree. Harry's earlier magic hand effects had felt like extensions of herself, a deformation of mana tied to her body. You could imagine 7 or 8 great hands, but they hadn't been truly solid. Now they appeared and vanished unpredictably, manifesting 10 meters away from her and packing several times the destructive force. A single punch could shred bones into fragments. The purple hand would crush a person outright. She wasn't finished. Harry raised her wand. Mana boiled and surged around her like a cauldron. Glorious Dragon Crescent. A colossal phantom flashed into being behind her, and a golden magical longblade over 10 meters long slashed down. The ground where it struck ruptured with a continuous boom. A trench more than 10 meters long, a meter wide and a meter deep, gouged the earth. Stones and bushes within 2 meters of the trench were shoved to its end. The longblade even detonated at the tip, leaving a deep pit where the trench terminated. It was raw, unrestrained power, almost the full destructive potential of her magic, pushed to its extreme. Ted turned to Malfoy, who stood watching with an expression that could only be called composed. "Ted, is this battered wizard job card even correct? This doesn't look like a mere profession, more like a mad patchwork." Harry, at barely 5'4", had just matched the destruction a 9-meter magic mecha could cause. She'd carved out her own terrifying path. Jerry hadn't come this time. Apparently he'd run into some emergency. Even if he had arrived, his skills weren't flashy, insidious tricks rather than grand displays, but vicious all the same. Hermione, watching the demonstration, felt a flare of dread. She'd been catching up on magic every day, reading and practicing, but compared to these performances, her own traditional spells felt old-fashioned. It bothered the academic perfectionist in her. Ted noticed her worry. He scooped her up onto the sofa, smoothed back her hair, and murmured, "I told you to focus on magic runes, did you?" "Of course," Hermione snapped back, proud. "I've memorized the rune dictionary and read everything you recommended. I've been designing my own circles." Ted smiled. "Good. I've got a special magic system that's perfect for you, but it needs a high level of rune skill. Don't worry, you'll catch up." Hermione kissed him fiercely. "With you here, I'm not worried." Ted feigned indignation. If you're not worried, stop tugging at my clothes. Broad daylight, remember? I still have things to do. An hour later, after Hermione tidied herself with a cleaning spell and pinched his foot, she asked, "So, what are you off to?" "I'm going to Duckamond," Ted said. "Jerry left a message. He can't make it. Something urgent. He wouldn't stand us up for nothing. I couldn't reach their village chief either. It's safer if I go check." "We'll go with you. Rest if you need to. I can come." Ted couldn't talk her out of it. He and Hermione used the Flu network and arrived in Duckamond. The village had changed since the summer before last. After the Land of Fire events, demi-humans, gnomes, and dwarves had grown closer and formed strategic ties. Their standing with the Ministry of Magic had improved. With Ted's trade connections and general improvements, the old wooden and earthen houses were now replaced with brick and stone. The village no longer looked medieval. It had taken on a 19th century sheen, complete with dwarven artifacts and gnomish machinery. But Uncle Pooley, the rat-eared shopkeeper, had bad news. Strange creatures had been appearing nearby. Yesterday, a small red-skinned monster had slipped into the neighborhood. The creatures were hungry and aggressive. After guards shot one, the others scattered, only to return and drag the corpse away. Today it was worse. Scouts found an enormous, irregular cave on a cliff 8 miles away that hadn't been there before. The land around it had turned dark red and gave off a putrid, metallic stench. The scouts also ran into the red-skinned creatures again, but this time one of them wasn't just a creature. It had a disproportionately large head and carried something like a staff or banner. The caster could raise the dead. The patrol fled. Jerry's absence suddenly made sense. Nearly half the village's fighting force had gone to investigate the cave. Ted frowned. Something was definitely wrong. Reports of otherworldly incursions were multiplying. Half-orcs in Switzerland, Black Forest spirits in Sweden. Britain had had its own anomalies. This new cave looked like another breach, something crossing into their world and bringing a corrupting magic with it. Ted asked, "Are there any corpses of those creatures in the village?" "No, they appeared too fast. A few were killed, but the others carried them off. We didn't expect resurrection." "Has the ministry been informed?" "We told them this morning, but they only sent a few young Aurors to observe and said to investigate first ourselves." Ted grimaced. Under Fudge's leadership, the ministry preferred not to overcommit unless something blew up into public view. Practical help was slow. Ted decided he couldn't wait. He, Hermione, and a dog-eared village lad hurried toward the cave. Ted quizzed the boy about who had gone and how many. The demi-human villages had retained substantial combat power, but they had to leave roughly half their forces behind to care for infants and defend the settlements. The ministry had stationed demi-humans here to guard the borderlands and keep magical beasts from spilling into the Muggle world, so the area was always on edge. About 20 had gone into the cave. They covered half the distance in just over 10 minutes. Hermione wore a pair of speed boots that let her run light and quick. As they passed a low thicket, Ted felt a sharp magical fluctuation. Several small projectiles streaked past. The dog-eared boy reacted fast and threw himself sideways. One projectile still found them, but it was stopped by Ted's mental barrier. Ted's shockwave killed 2 of the attacking beasts instantly. A third, stunned in midair, fell limp as Ted pierced its nervous system. He reached into its memory. The creature wasn't bright. Its memories were mostly of the environment changing 3 days ago. Apparently, it had only appeared around then. It looked like a cross between a giant rat and a wild boar. 1 meter long, half a meter tall, a long body with a back covered in many 20 to 30 centimeter quills. When threatened, it fired dozens of quills at once. Ted retrieved one and sniffed it, slightly poisonous. "A new type of magical beast, probably from another world," he said. "About 15 to 20 kilos, level 1 magical reaction. I'll take the quill for study." Hermione wrapped the dog-eared boy in protective wards and threw shields on herself, activating several talismans. They pushed on. Less than 20 minutes later, the soil underfoot began to redden. The grass and weeds withered. The earth smelled faintly of blood and rot. Ted examined a pinch of soil. It wasn't raw necromantic decay, but it was worse. Thin, corrupt magic that tasted of darkness, blood, and putrefaction. The kind of permeation that would kill vegetation for months. Ted pulled out his connection to the ideal land directory and rang Dumbledore. After a 10-second delay, Dumbledore's voice came through, calm but taut. "Ted, I'm in Denmark. What is it?" "There's an invasion around Dicamande, an otherworldly breach. The land's been contaminated. If it's serious, we'll need the ministry." "Understood. I'll have Severus take a look. Be careful. You too." After the call, Ted opened the group chat. "Friends, we have a job. Finish what you're doing and come to Dicamande. Jerry and his crew are in trouble." Ron's reply exploded with energy. "I'm on my way. I'll ask Mum for leave. With my new weapon, I'll have a proper fight." Harry chimed in. "Draco and I are coming." Neville texted, "I'll be a bit late. My uncle's taking me to a banquet. I feel like a performing monkey." Ron, running up the stairs in a flurry of clattering footsteps, argued with his mother over Ginny. Ted added, almost as an aside, "Snape will be coming too." It took mere minutes before reinforcements gathered. Ted and his group reached the cliff base where other demi-humans had assembled. "Ted! Ted!" The lookouts brightened at the sight of him. His standing in Dicamande had grown, maybe higher than the village chief's. Young demi-humans chattered with excitement. Ted asked for a situation report. The rabbit-eared scout shuffled and scratched his ear. "It's bad, maybe. The cave has red creatures and other strange things. There are skeletons, too. The village chief and his party have gone in 3 times to explore. The cave is huge, many passages." The cave gaped on a cliff face about 2 meters above ground, an irregular maw like karst, at least 7 or 8 meters across. Dark bloodstains ringed the entrance. There'd been fighting, but the dozen or so demi-humans on duty were uninjured for now. "Any corpses of the red things?" Ted asked. The scout led them to a sunny patch where 7 or 8 corpses lay. The creatures stood about 1.3 meters tall. Their skin was red, hairless, wrinkled like old rubber. They wore ragged scraps and had sharp yellow teeth and small horns. A faint sulfur reek clung to the bodies. Ted knelt, running a quick identification. Fallen 1, level 2 infernal demon. 383. Snape, I'll kill you quietly. "Ah, yes, it's you." An old friend. When Ted first heard rumors about the thing down in the cave, he had his suspicions. After he saw the corpse, he was almost certain. Now that someone had named it, there could be no doubt. Fallen 1. Those small savage imps from the Bloodmoor in Act 1 of Diablo 2, one of Hell's lowest-level demons. Nothing remarkable about them, except their numbers, and the fact that the Fallen 1 wizard can raise their bodies again. Their souls were anchored by Hell. They did not disperse. "How did you kill them?" Ted asked. "I heard some of them can raise others." "We kill the casters first." The rabbit-eared young man shrugged. "At first they gave us a lot of trouble. We fought for ages, and the dead would just jump back up. So we found the spellcasters and took them out first," the other replied. "And the corpses. Burned them. Prevents trouble later. These few were only killed recently. When we have enough corpses, we'll burn them together." "Wise choice," Ted said. Setting a body aflame wouldn't destroy the soul, but it would stop quick reanimation. That was enough for most practical purposes, at least short-term. Still, Ted's mind raced. What did those demon souls mean? If they remained intact, could something strange happen? If he wanted to destroy a soul, how would he do it? "Ted? Hermione? You in there?" Ron's croaky voice carried up the slope of the mountain. If there were bears in these hills, his shouting would frighten them to death. "Stop shouting!" Ansu dropped from a tree onto Ron's shoulder. "Keep moving. It isn't far." Ansu turned and bowed almost theatrically to Harry, Draco, and Anne. "Long time no see, Harry, and Draco and Anne." "Hi, Ansu," Harry said with a grin. Draco returned the bow with aristocratic polish. Anne waved shyly. Without Neville present, she was still reserved, getting animated only when she spotted him. The group had met in Diagon Alley and come together here. Neville hadn't arrived yet. Whatever banquet had held him up was still in progress. By now, Ted and Hermione had been on site for nearly an hour. They had built a basic defensive ring at the cave mouth, wooden chevaux de frise and low stone walls, and Ted reinforced it with an alchemy array and protective spells. He'd even erected 2 simple watchtowers in a pincer formation flanking the entrance, observation points and high ground for defending the approach. Ted couldn't help thinking, somewhat pleased, that it had the feel of a tower defense game. 2 scouting teams had already withdrawn from the cave. One had been roughed up but still intact. The other had two wounded members, one with a flesh wound and another with internal injuries who had to be carried out. He'd reportedly been punched and hurled by a giant ape-like brute. Ted poured a healing potion down the injured man's throat to stabilize him and sent him back to the village. He wouldn't be fighting for a while. Among the retreating scouts were the Oxhorn village chief and the cat girl. They described the cave as an almost bottomless labyrinth, dark with many branching passages, uneven terrain, and endless dead ends. Skeletons and zombies were common, as were strange giant beasts and the spiky guinea pigs Ted had seen on the road. "This place is huge," the chief said. "We split into 3 groups for a quick sweep, but within half an hour we had to pull back. The monsters kept getting thicker." They compared the maps their teams had sketched. Ted used a spell to merge the layouts and realized they'd seen only a sliver of the complex. "Jerry still hasn't come back?" Ron fretted. "He'll be fine." Ted shook his head. Jerry, who excelled in stealth and darkness, had been trained by Ted in shadow power. He moved like a creature of the shadows, everywhere and nowhere. Dangerous caves didn't bother him. Sure enough, 40 minutes later, Jerry and Sherry, the 2 human rats, slid out of the cave mouth like guilty rodents. "Ted, Ron, you're all here?" Jerry said, wide-eyed. "Sherry, long time," Ted replied. Ron folded his arms and aspirated. "I was afraid you'd throw yourselves away in there. You need Master Ron." "If you built a wall 3 or 4 meters high, Master Ron, your first machine wouldn't fit," Ted said dryly. "Did you bring your little bear mech?" Ron sputtered. "What, of course I did." Jerry produced his recordings from his spatial pouch. There were skeletons and zombies, corrupted humans, 3-meter-tall muscular ape beasts, and strange altars, some stone, some wood, inscribed with unfamiliar runes. Jerry had touched them and received temporary, potent enhancements. "We found a downward passage farther in," Jerry said. "That's where we pulled out." The first level was troublesome, mainly because of the environment. Crowding and poor visibility made it risky to push farther. With Ted here, however, Jerry gained confidence. Ted thought for a long beat. The cave itself wasn't the problem. It was time and numbers. The real issue was the fallen one's resurrection. If the souls were persistent, merely destroying the bodies now would invite trouble later. Souls, Ted's mental gears whirred. Historically, experimenting on souls had been taboo. Even studying magical creature souls was a line the community avoided. His Book of Seals fragment had stalled his research into the Reaper Death Seal precisely because he wouldn't touch souls. But now there was, essentially, an abundance of test subjects, legally obtained and obvious. An opportunity like this was rare. "How about this?" Ted said. "We set up a temporary ideal land and envelop the mountain with a magical projection that will catch any hidden phenomena and let us observe. The whole cave will be exposed." Everyone agreed. An ideal land would make it far safer. Casualties would be minimized, and work could proceed methodically. Hermione, however, watched Ted with a sharp, suspicious look. She didn't believe he was fussing over the fallen ones purely out of altruism. Ted never fussed without another purpose. Ted pulled materials and equipment from his spatial bag and began drawing alchemical arrays around the mountain. The first step nearly complete, more people began to arrive. From a distance, they looked like a slowly moving dark cloud. In moments, they were at the camp. The subhuman archer on the tower hardly blinked. His usual wariness seemed absent. Snape was already at the temporary camp's entrance. He was the same sallow-faced, long-haired professor the students hated, expression perpetually sour, robes as black as his mood. "Epiphany, Harry Potter. I trust Dumbledore hasn't sent me to babysit you lot," Snape drawled. Ron shrank behind Ginny, making faces. "Ronald Weasley, are you having a spasm?" Snape said with deadpan cruelty. No, Professor. I'm fine," Ron blurted, alarmed. "How did the man see him hiding?" Everyone assumed Snape was unchanged. It was his presence that unnerved them. Only Ted felt something different. When he probed carefully, he saw an appraisal flicker past. Snape was level 19, on the cusp of a legendary breakthrough. Quiet, unannounced progress. Impressive. Ted smirked inwardly. Snape stepped into the defensive ring and, with a flick of his sleeve, released a puff of black smoke. It flowed like a swarm of tiny serpents into the cave. Several minutes later, his eyes cleared. "At least you didn't rush in like a troll before I arrived," he said. "Shows your brains aren't entirely hollow." There are a lot of monsters inside, and it's a bit peculiar, someone began. Snape cut them off, raised a slab of earth, produced a cauldron and a spirit lamp, and began brewing a potion like a man at home. Ted shrugged and kept working. The ideal land network needed only one more link to the telluric magic net, and they could drop the projection over the cave and force any soul or resurrection anomalies into the open. Ted was eager to see what secrets the mountain hid. Snape finished his brew with effortless, practiced movements. He held up a flask the size of a human head. A pale green mist hovered at its neck, writhing. He hefted the heavy bottle with casual strength, shook it once, and without another word, began pouring the potion onto the ground in a broad stream. The green liquid spread as if alive, crawling outward into a filmy stain that turned the foul red earth to a sickly green. The sight made several of the subhumans edge away. Snape looked up, impatient. "What are you waiting for? Go into the cave and kill them. Don't waste time." The students stared. The professor was ordering them to go into the cave and fight. Snape sneered as he poured. "Waiting for me to hand-feed you courage? Move." Ted led the group into the cave. Hermione left Ginny outside to wait for Neville. She didn't want Neville to return and find Snape standing guard. Ginny protested, but agreed. Inside, Hermione summoned dozens of fist-sized orbs of light that floated ahead like a small sun, banishing darkness and any feeling of dread. Skeletons and zombies fell easily to their spells at range. The spiky guinea pigs were harder, crafty ambushers, until Ted dealt with them. The companions cast shields and ice barriers, so surprise attacks were not very dangerous. The first time they encountered a cluster of about 20 Fallen One, Ted had everyone keep their distance. He wanted to test something. He sent a repelling spell that sent one Fallen flying. It spewed blood and twitched twice as it hit the ground. The others rushed forward, shrieking and brandishing crude weapons. One Fallen One wizard in the distance lifted its staff and began muttering. 10 seconds later, the Fallen that had been smashed suddenly twitched and, impossibly, sat up. Ted slammed a wall of stone between them and the reanimated corpse and focused on his instruments and the ideal land sensors. Parker, back in Hogwarts' Chamber of Secrets, allotted some computing power and began analyzing the stream. Ted's eyes glowed faint blue as the readouts fed him information. There were indeed anomalies, data signatures, and magical fluctuations around the process of death and resurrection. Ted killed another Fallen One, and through the ideal land, he reached in and grabbed a strange substance that separated from the corpse. He transferred it to a containment matrix. The Fallen One wizard started a frantic ritual, gesturing and chanting. The corpses lay still. It took a long moment, but the dead did not rise. "It's working," Ted said, a sharp thrill in his voice. He'd found something that behaved like a soul, an independent magical component that enabled the Fallen One's resurrection. If he could capture or alter that substance, the game changed completely. Parker's analysis blinked back confirmation. The captured essence had signatures consistent with sentient, persistent animation. Ted leaned closer to the readouts. Interesting. Very interesting. 384. Too busy, mind blast. Bang! A loud crack echoed through the spirit realm, and a dozen or so Fallen Ones suddenly went rigid and collapsed. The Fallen One wizard froze, staring at his motionless subordinates. He had no idea how to resurrect them. Ted had already harvested those Fallen One souls through the ideal land. The wizard fumbled uselessly. None of his minions stirred. Realization flashed across his face, and he abandoned the attempt to revive them. He began another chant, a spark of fire igniting in his palm. "I'll fight to the death." The next instant, Ted flicked his wrist. The Fallen One wizard heard the sick snap of his own neck. The mind hand had broken it. Apparently, the souls of Fallen One wizards and Fallen Ones were not essentially different. Ted had simply taken them. Why did only these Fallen Ones show obvious souls? Ted had never seen souls when he killed undead and other monsters in the Paris catacombs in the ideal land. Were these Fallen Ones different because they came from the Diablo 2 world? There was no time for theory crafting now. Ted led his companions deeper into the cave. They ran into more zombies, slow but stiff and durable, with 2 levels of magic resistance. They were tough, no fear, no hesitation, especially dangerous in the cave's confined spaces. Ordinary wizards would need to rely on proficient fire magic or powerful Defindo to deal with them. Another monster type they encountered matched Jerry's earlier description: mutated, giant, muscular apes. Over 2 meters tall, arms thicker than Hermione's waist, dirty gray-green or yellow-green long fur, awkward but ferocious. When they saw people, they pounced and roared with terrifying strength. An ice arrow through the heart even dropped a white card. Strength. Material card, a symbol of immense strength. Note: use great strength, create miracles. The interior of the evil cave was labyrinthine. The whole mountain seemed hollowed out, full of branching passages, each infested with monsters. Ted had to send out his hog squad, summoning Softy, a clay golem, a troll, and other summons, forming teams to clear each branch. They killed every monster, not even sparing mutated rats. Monsters affected by the inferno dropped cards at a surprisingly high rate. Before long, Ted had a stack of white and green cards. Besides strength, there was Harry, weak to fire, which looked like a negative card, Hell Fireball, green, a spell card dropped by a Fallen One wizard, and several Demon Skin, white, Corpse Poison, white, and so on. After about an hour, the first level was finally cleared. Ted released reconnaissance flying insects to scout for dangers, then found the passage to the second level. A narrow, irregular spiral led down, winding, steep, and naturally formed rather than excavated. The companions displayed their abilities and descended. Hermione handled the lighting, scattering fist-sized clusters of light through the dark. Harry's fists glowed with blue magic, her iron fists itching for a fight. Malfoy kept his wand ready, a black snake coiled on his arm. The snake could detect magic and see in infrared, preventing ambushes. Ron rode the bear mech, while Jerry and Sherry scouted ahead and behind. Everyone was battle-ready. The second level proved harder. Monsters were generally 1 to 2 levels stronger than on the first floor, but the drop rates were better. Ted amassed a pile of white and gray cards. Elite units began to appear, fallen ones with special abilities. One ran impossibly fast. Malfoy killed one with a spell, then turned to aim at another, and watched its legs churn so quickly it vanished before he could react. Some had ice affinities, short knives rhymed in blue frost, and a slain ice-enhanced Fallen One could drop an ice ring 2.5 meters across. If an elite like that were paired with a Fallen One wizard's resurrection, it would be a walking, self-destructing bomb. Fortunately, Ted harvested their souls cleanly, preventing messy resurrections. Other elites were fire-enhanced, lightning-augmented, or just exceptionally strong. Fallen One wizards could rain hellfire balls. Regular hellfire balls were human head-sized, slow but powerful, exploding and leaving clinging burning and evil infection. Their hellfire ball rains were worse, fist-sized bolts, countless in number, sweeping a wide area in an instant. The companions barely dodged, not willing to test whether their defenses could withstand those malignant flames. Elite units also had higher chances of dropping cards. After clearing waves of enhanced gorillas and Fallen One squads, they met a new type, not quite undead, but not living either. Female in form and lithe, usually clad in chainmail or leather, sometimes helmets, armed with spears or bows, quick and skilled at ambush and ranged attacks. Their skin had a bluish-green pallor, and they exuded a cold magic, sometimes hiding in the dark to titter maliciously. Fallen Rogue Warrior, Level 3 Amazon Warrior, Level 2 Hell Demon. Jerry muttered a classification. These fallen rogue warriors had once been brave fighters who'd opposed Hell. Defeated, they hadn't fully died. Hell's magic had corrupted them into half-dead humanoids. Level 5 enemies were already much stronger than common kobolds, goblins, or murlocs. In the cave's terrain, they were especially nasty, adept at ambush and fleeing after a missed arrow. Chasing them was futile. They moved through the winding caves like it was their living room. Fortunately, Jerry and Sherry did the dirty work. The rogues were pre-targeted, and as they took aim, daggers slit the back of their heads. Ted formed a sticky psychic field around the group. Arrows and javelins entering its radius were trapped as if in glue, harmless. After dispatching 50 or 60 fallen rogue warriors, they ran into another massive pack of zombies, 20 or 30 jammed into a single-side passage like a rush-hour subway. Seeing his companions exhausted, Ted sent Softy in. "Today you get an extra meal. Meat," he announced. Softy flowed through the passage in a pale green flood, licking away stone as it went. It left nothing alive. But it suddenly halted. It had been attacked, and badly. It contracted and communicated with Ted. "I'm hurt. Avenge me." Ted led the party to the troubled side branch. The cavity was not small. Dozens of zombies had been here before, but only a dozen remained. The rest had been eaten by Softy. The survivors were clustered behind a towering, 2-meter, eerie blue zombie, clearly the one that had wounded Softy. The other zombies looked ragged and gray, but this blue one was different. Full muscles, smooth skin, natural magical sigils coursing across it. Corpse Fire, Elite Unit, Level 7 Zombie King, Level 8 Hell Lord. Jerry reported, a Level 15 Elite. They had to take it seriously. The battle proved that the companions could handle themselves. Alone, none of them could defeat a Level 15 Elite, but in pairs, they could hold the line. Corpse Fire's strengths were straightforward. Enormous attack and defense, heavy melee damage, and immense magic resistance. It was easily toyed with tactically, but its raw power was brutal. Malfoy tried to raise a stone wall 30 centimeters thick. Corpse Fire shattered it with a single claw. When its ghostly claws glowed deep blue, the impact hit like a cannonball. Stone turned to dust. Steel could be torn apart as if by Diffindo. A portion of Softy's body was ripped into pulp and rendered unreformable by that blow. Corpse Fire's physical defenses and magic resistance were absurdly high. Spells pinged off it like laser dots, barely affecting it. Thankfully, it was not fast, and with enchanted boots, the companions could kite it. Last year, they would have panicked, inexperienced and weak. This year, they were mature, coordinated. While they still couldn't inflict huge damage, they were controlling the fight. Ted finally acted. His magic penetration was level 6. Corpse Fire's magic resistance was level 7, nearly negating spell damage. With both offsetting, the effective resistance was only a little. Ted summoned his Patronus Black Dragon and let it eat Corpse Fire. The dragon would take time to digest, but the meal would hopefully strengthen it, making it tougher and more resilient. Ding! Mission completed. Clear the evil cave. The formation of the evil cave is a manifestation of hellish magic erosion. Kill every monster in the evil cave and purify this land. Reward 1 skill point. A hidden quest. Ted grinned. His guess had been right. He casually dumped the skill point into magic penetration. Damn, he thought, let's see who dares resist my magic now. By the time they emerged, Snape had already left. The dark red, fetid ground reverted to its original state. No grass yet, but the corruption had receded. Soon it would regrow. The companions celebrated with a hearty meal at Diamond and headed home to rest. They planned to hold a debrief in the group chat later to tally gains and losses. But this evil cave was only a small taste of what was coming. 2 days later, a plea arrived from Fleur. Fleur, 3 days ago, French Ministry of Magic agents found a cave at the foot of the Pyrenees. Ted froze. A second evil cave? Nightmare difficulty? He listened, wary. Thankfully, it wasn't that extreme. In 2 nearby towns, people had begun falling into unbreakable deep sleep. 30 to 40 people were in hospital beds, breathing and with heartbeats, kept alive by IVs, but otherwise like the dead. Investigators discovered that in the days before the sleep set in, victims all reported dreaming of a cave. Their sleep deepened until they couldn't wake. Magic agents traced a cave in the mountains. Inside were strange creatures and a potent dream power. 2 careless wizards who entered fell into unbreakable sleep. Several agents were injured, including snake bites. Fleur knew of Ted's work with spirits and dreams and asked for his help. Ted was intrigued. He told Professor McGonagall and Hermione about the request. Hermione, who had to visit her grandparents, couldn't come and was furious at being left out. England and France really were close. The French agents treated Ted with respect despite his youth and explained the situation thoroughly. Mr. Ted, the cave seems connected to venting channels. Sometimes air currents make it wail. Inside there are many strange creatures and venomous snakes. One agent said. Ted asked, what kind of strange creatures? Many strange dinosaurs, crocodiles, and other reptiles, another replied. Fleur added, there are also slimes very similar to your softy. Ted laughed inwardly. He'd just cleared an evil cave like Diablo 2. Now this sounded like Wailing Caverns from World of Warcraft. Blizzard multiverse conspiracy? He imagined some developer troll behind Kotick. Wailing Caverns lore rang alarms, druids trying to contact the Emerald Dream, corruption by the old gods, dreams leaking into the cave and twisting creatures. If it were the Emerald Dream here, he might be in over his head. After probing carefully, he relaxed a little. There were monsters and a dream connection, but it wasn't the Emerald Dream. Azeroth's dream was unique to that universe. This cave linked into this world's dreamscape, not Azeroth's. Ted had just started serious research on the spirit plane, and now the dream plane was being dragged into his workload. He sighed. He was getting too busy. I did it to you in my dream. I did it to you in my dream. Ted took no chances. For over 20 hours, he moved through multiple layers of protection. Magic Net Utopia, several cloud drives, virtual personalities, spirit network firewalls, and a screen of zombie puppets, before he dared contact those trapped in deep sleep. He checked a few muggles first. All of them were in the third layer of dreaming. Time there was stretched almost infinitely. Their spirits couldn't return, so they couldn't wake up. The two affected wizards were different. Their spirits were trapped in the second layer. The magic's pull and the shorter duration had kept them from slipping into the third layer, but their dream space was more complex and dangerous. Wizards change the world with magic. Broadly speaking, a wizard's dream is a form of wish fulfillment. Magic is the lever, will the fulcrum. How much a wizard can alter reality depends on those 2 points. And in dreams, that power is magnified. That explained why, when Ted had once entered Rita Skeeter's dream, he'd almost been taken over. Inside another's dream territory, a wizard's ability to make dreams real becomes terrifyingly strong. But Ted wasn't the same as before. With his growing experience and precautions, he dismantled the dream defenses of the two wizards, seized control of their dreamlands, defeated them there, and dragged their spirits back. It was only then he realized there was no Emerald Dream and no old gods. He'd been fighting an imaginary enemy. Still, the caution had been necessary. Rescuing the wizards went smoothly. Their spirits were badly depleted, but otherwise intact. The muggles in the third layer were another matter. The third layer magnified time and space roughly 20-fold compared to the second. It was a much richer, far stranger place. Ted tried to enter one little boy's dream and found himself overwhelmed. The 10-year-old had conjured 18 transformers and a herd of dinosaurs to greet him. Worse, ordinary dreamers don't know they're dreaming and can't consciously control the fabric of the dream. It runs on subconscious instinct. The boy's fantasies produced happy things, but his instinctive fears produced horrors. Vampires, terrifying clowns, Captain Hook, chainsaw murderers. Ted thought, not for the first time, that children probably shouldn't watch so many horror films. Once the dream detected an intruder, its creations, good and bad, banded together and chased Ted. He fought for 10 minutes and still couldn't stop the endless nightmares or locate the dream's master. He had to retreat. "I need your help," he told Fleur. "I need you with me in the dream, and I need equipment forged." Ted could invade dreams with spirit power, but he wasn't a dream specialist. In the third layer, he couldn't hide well, and detection meant being overwhelmed. He needed gear that would allow smooth infiltration of the third layer, and he needed Fleur's charm to reach the dreamer's trust. He was assisting the French Ministry of Magic. This wasn't charity. Coincidentally, he had just learned the method for forging magical rings and hadn't tried it yet. Perfect timing. Time was pressing. Wizards used enormous spirit power in the second layer. Muggles burned out far faster in the third. 1 hour in reality could feel like a month in the third layer. The first person to fall asleep had been unconscious for 3 days. That was 6 years of subjective time. If this dragged on, their spirits could be exhausted or even die in their dreams. Ted needed Fleur inside them to apply her charm so they could coax the dreamers back. He also had to reduce the dream's reflexive rejection of him so he wouldn't be immediately mobbed. He gathered materials: adamantine 2.2 kilograms, mithril 4 grams, silver 10 kilograms, 2 pints of fire salamander blood, and a bucket of Arctic ice water. Adamantine was dense. 2.2 kilograms was a small lump, limiting the size of whatever he could forge. Mithril was almost feather-light. 4 grams was surprisingly voluminous next to the adamantine. 10 kilograms of ordinary silver could be refined into about 300 grams of goblin magic silver using the formula Ted now had. That would be enough despite some expected loss. He wasn't paying goblins exorbitant prices. Standing within an alchemy array with 3 concentric circles at its apex, Ted smelted the metals together. Under the array's catalysis, the salamander blood burst into a ghostly blue flame. The 3 metals fused and contracted under magic pressure, and the array's hammering, slowly taking shape as a pair of rings. Ted channeled magic and engraved runes: dream, concealment, seduction, follow. He quenched the rings in Arctic spring water. Steam hissed, magic flowed into the metal, and 2 rings were finished. They were plain but purposeful. One was slightly thicker, with a gold base and silver lettering to help Ted slip into dreams. The other was thinner, with a silver base and gold lettering, fashioned for a female wearer, to let Fleur follow and amplify her charm in the dream. His craftsmanship was crude for a first try, but the rings would work. Fleur blushed when Ted handed over the silver ring. She turned away and extended her finger. He rolled his eyes and tossed it. She snatched it up, giving him a glare for his lack of romance. They linked hands. The rings glowed faintly and pulled them through a kaleidoscopic tunnel, a place with no space or time. Without Ted's guidance, Fleur might have drifted and been lost in the dream. They dropped into the 10-year-old's fantasy. Ted's ring hummed, and a thin veil of spirit power masked them. Disguised, they moved past herbivorous and carnivorous dinosaurs, skirted a fight between Transformers and a vampire Captain Hook, and reached a fairy tale castle. Posing as a guard and a maid, they slipped into the top-floor bedchamber. On the huge red velvet bed, the boy was absorbed in a toy car. Ted let his eyes wander into the boy's memories. The disguise held. The dream didn't reject them. He whispered to Fleur, "Change plans. Don't be his older sister. I see them fighting every day. He never wins against her." Fleur, who hadn't even had a boyfriend yet, wanted to punch him. In the end, she agreed to play his mother. With the dream ring and the 3rd layer amplifying her charm, Fleur was devastating. She soothed the boy, rocked him, sang to him. He fell asleep in her arms. Ted took a breath and pulled them all back to reality. When they opened their eyes, the boy was awake in his own bed. His spirit had been badly depleted. He'd need 10 days to 2 weeks of recovery. One by one, using the same method, Ted and Fleur rescued 5 or 6 more people. Each dream was different. Some were decadent fantasies, where Ted had to trick out a safe's password and open it before he could take the dreamer. Some shifted violently from sunshine to storms as fragile spirits oscillated, causing intense suffering. The worst was a handsome young scoundrel. In his dream, he was an absolute cad, surrounded by more beauties than a Victoria's Secret show and dressed far skimpier. Fleur was furious and kicked him several times rather than triggering any dream defenses. The women were only illusions, so manageable even when unruly. Ted hauled the cad out, and Fleur grounded him in reality. Others were fantasies of classic adventure. One dreamer was a knight on a quest to rescue a princess. Ted even met a nymph at the water's edge, a Vila-level beauty in a leaf outfit. Ted gaped until he realized she had safety shorts under the grass skirt and felt betrayed by the prudishness. Fleur teased, "Do you want me to catch one for you to play with?" "Absolutely not," Ted snapped. For some dreams, the pair didn't bother to disguise themselves. They told the knight to slay the dragon and rescue the princess, then woke him with a well-timed backstab, a lesson apparently. There were tender dreams too. In an old man's dream, Ted and Fleur walked through his life with his wife. A childhood meeting, a love that grew, a family, aging together, and finally her death. In the dream, they were young and well and forever warm. Fleur hesitated. "Do we really have to wake him? This is beautiful," Ted answered softly. "Everything here is an illusion. This happiness is not real. It's the memory he chose to live in. He deserves his life back." They woke the old man. A little girl burst out of the next room. "Dad, Grandpa's awake?" Family members gathered. The son and daughter wept with joy, and the little granddaughter asked innocently, "Grandpa, did you dream of anything?" The old man stroked her head and said, "I dreamed of your grandma. It was beautiful. When you grow up, I'll find her." The last dreamer left Fleur thinking. It was a blind woman's lucid dream. She knew she was dreaming and had built a garden outside a sunny wooden house, tending flowers and drinking tea. She laughed when Fleur asked whether she wanted to wake. "Do you mean I'll stop seeing when I wake?" She smiled. My nose can smell, my ears can hear, my hands can touch. Even if I can see here, I know it's an illusion. I can touch the real world. I always wanted a garden but was afraid I wouldn't see it properly. Now I can grow one even without sight. With Ted's guidance, she left the dream. Because of the Howling Cavern's influence, the dream would linger before fading. Fleur looked at the bright garden, something clicking into place. She turned to Ted and smiled. You were right. It's a dream. Everything here is an illusion. She reached for his arm. So why hold back in a dream? The scenery is lovely. I'm perfectly content. Ted felt a chill of foreboding. He'd had dreams like that before and never wanted to enter Rita's dream again after. People's desires at 30 could be tricky, but it was too late. Fleur's charm, boosted by the third layer and the dream ring, had multiplied. Ribbons of colored light swirled around her. She shone like a goddess. Ted felt his mental defenses slip. Everything in him melted except one stubborn part. He was an old fox, though, paranoid for good reason. He'd built protections against mental assault in case of the ancient gods, and those wards now saved him. With a last, furious effort, he counterstruck, and with a sharp smack woke Fleur from the dream. Fleur blinked at the real bedroom wall and instinctively rubbed her backside. Getting spanked in a dream apparently hurt in reality. Damn! He'd hit hard enough for it to swell. Ted had used every ounce of physical force he had, even the strength he used to eat Hera, don't get the wrong idea. Fleur snorted as he fled in embarrassment. You couldn't be caught even like that, she said, mock appreciative, as expected of the man I value. Everyone had been rescued. Now they had to deal with the Howling Cavern itself. Because the dream was bleeding into reality, others couldn't go too deep without getting lost. It still required Ted and Fleur together. Ted sent Softy ahead. Extra meal, it announced. Start eating, Softy replied. Ted followed, picking up cards as they went. The cavern was full of strange plant-like monsters. Ted caught several specimens for Neville. They would be fascinating, and collected other creatures from the otherworldly ecosystem for research. Imagine velociraptors in Muggle society. Biology as they knew it would be overturned. Deeper in the cave, the stone grew half real, half dream. Without Ted, the French Ministry of Magic probably couldn't have handled it. At last, they reached an altar at the cave's end. Ted lit 4 candles. Venomous snakes surged from a black lake, and a huge white merman, 4 or 5 meters tall, rose from the water. Softy handled the snakes, forming a wall to swallow any that charged. Ted and Fleur fought the merman together and brought it down in under a minute. The dream began to separate from reality. Ted exhaled. He noticed Fleur wiping her silver ring and realized she'd been wearing it on her middle finger the whole time. Ted had gained a lot from the mission: experience, monster cards, equipment, and material cards. He wasn't thrilled about one other thing, though. How would he explain recent events to Hermione? While Ted was still considering this, Hermione messaged Fleur privately. Did you succeed? Sister, don't worry. I always have a chance. Ha! Me? Nervous? You failed this time, and you might not get another chance. Then do you think my ring looks good? Hermione inhaled sharply and nearly combusted. Ted returned to Britain and went straight to Hermione. The ring I made you? Do you like it? He'd made it overnight. Hermione slipped it on, studied it, then looked up suspiciously. This isn't a leftover, is it? I knew that if others couldn't find a use for things, they'd give them to me. Ted waved his hands. No, I made one first to practice, to make sure I could do it right before making yours. The ring that could enter dreams was given to Fleur because we needed it for the mission. Hermione gave him a long look and then nodded. Ted wiped imaginary sweat from his brow. Good thing he'd thought things through. 386, Nanotechnology, Boy. 3 Nanotechnology, Boy. Chapter 372, Nanotechnology, Kid. Ding, talent otherworld knowledge triggered. Discovered, Metal Gear Solid nanoparticle production process diagram, blue. The diagram recorded the production processes for nanoparticle technology from an unfamiliar Earth timeline. It required 550 experience points to exchange. It was August, and the new otherworld knowledge this month was sci-fi themed. Nanoparticles showed up in many modern sci-fi universes. Tony Stark's nanotech armor in the Avengers was a good example, so Ted decided to spend the points and take a look. It was interesting. Mostly, he was curious whether magic metals could be reduced to nanoparticles or whether they could be used to build special rune devices. Could this be combined with mind power? For now, though, the Book of Sealing and its forbidden techniques demanded priority. He had already collected a number of fallen demon souls from the evil cave, perfect for studying things like the dead demon-consuming seal. Very tempting indeed. On August 8th, Ted got a letter from school. He'd been named a head boy. It turned out several students had received the same notice. Neville, Harry, Hermione, Ted, and Malfoy were all head boys and head girls in their respective houses. Ron was predictably furious. Others could take it, but why Malfoy? Was Slytherin just short on applicants? More important to Ted was a ministry decree that had just come down. Ministry of Magic Educational Decree Number 2 stipulated that if Dumbledore could not find a suitable candidate, the ministry would be allowed to appoint the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. The post had become notorious. Nobody wanted it, and Fudge had been tightening the screws on Dumbledore. Dumbledore himself was tied up. He and Voldemort were fighting a proxy war in Norway, each side micromanaging subordinates through open and covert operations. Dumbledore had international support from the International Confederation of Wizards, but Voldemort had effectively coerced the Norwegian magical community, binding many of its members by marks of submission and fear. Away from Britain, Voldemort behaved like a dragon returned to the deep sea and a tiger back to the mountains. He was more ruthless and decisive. Dumbledore, constrained by scruples, had fewer effective options. With just over 20 days left before term started, the ministry might step in and appoint someone, but politics could wait. Ted had magic in his studies. Let them play their games. A few days later, he received a secret letter from Lucius Malfoy. 2 years before, Lucius and Ted had arranged a highly confidential contact method to avoid exposing Ted. A few months back, Lucius had even sealed parts of his own memories so Voldemort wouldn't suspect his betrayal. Lucius himself no longer remembered conspiring with Ted or betraying Voldemort. The memory seal had a built-in fallback, though. When a specific trigger occurred, the seal would lift and the memories would return. This time the trigger was Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix, mad, fanatically loyal to Voldemort, had appeared in Nocturne Alley the night before and contacted Lucius through the Dark Mark, asking him to cooperate in a task from their master. When Lucius's memories returned, he panicked. In Voldemort's eyes, he was half dead already. Now he was certain his master intended to kill his family slowly and painfully because Lucius had damaged the notebook Voldemort had given him, his Horcrux, and a piece of his life. Lucius had no protection but Ted. Dumbledore couldn't be relied on to protect Order members. Many had died already. Lucius contacted Ted in desperation. "So Voldemort wants Bellatrix to rob Gringotts?" Ted asked, incredulous. "Is he that short on money?" "It's not exactly robbery. She told me she needs to retrieve something from her vault," Lucius said, nervous. "Bellatrix wouldn't say what it was and forbade me from asking." Lucius feared he was nothing more than a pawn to be sacrificed. If Voldemort thought him useless, he'd be tortured to death and his family punished. Ted considered the possibilities. If something important was in Bellatrix's vault, the Golden Cup, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, made sense. It had been given to Bellatrix by Voldemort and stored in her Gringotts vault in Canon. If Voldemort recovered too many Horcruxes, his mind would clear and he'd be even more dangerous. It was crucial to stop that. Ted asked whether Bellatrix had come alone. Lucius named several names: Antonin Dolohov, Mulciber, Rodolphus Lestrange, and Rabistan Lestrange, at least 4. And Lucius suspected he wasn't the only insider Bellatrix had lined up. Many escaped Death Eaters still lurked in Britain, some with respectable positions. They couldn't be trusted. "Sounds like they want to make a big play," Ted said lightly. "Mr. Malfoy, I have a way to keep you and your family safe. Are you willing to try it?" Lucius listened warily. Ted's plan was simple and ruthless. Go along with Bellatrix's plot, but ensure the cup never makes it back to Voldemort. If the operation went sideways, make Lucius apparently dead. If Voldemort sees Lucius dead, he's less likely to torment his corpse, and Lucifer could buy his family a chance to flee. It would also mean Lucius would be removed from active service, which might be safer for Draco. Ted didn't expect to gain much from saving Lucius. As an insider, his value to Voldemort was limited anyway. Lucius agreed eagerly. Ted didn't intend to carry out the dirty work himself. He notified Dumbledore privately. Bellatrix and several trusted Death Eaters were active in Britain and appeared to be planning a major operation at Gringotts. Dumbledore, wary and irked, stared at Ted with that odd look he always reserved for him. Sometimes the boy was more inscrutable than Voldemort himself. This couldn't be ignored. To avoid leaks, after all, Voldemort had cultivated supporters in Britain for decades. Dumbledore didn't call on the Order or local Aurors. Instead, he summoned a group of foreign wizards to Britain discreetly and prepared a trap. On the morning of August 19th, as Gringotts opened, the raid struck with unnerving precision. Several wizards inside the bank began attacking goblin tellers. 7 or 8 attackers charged in from outside. In the first wave, 8 goblins were struck down by spells. At least 3 were killed outright by Avada Kedavra. Others were grievously wounded. Some attackers erected spell formations to cut off communication and prevent reinforcements. Others didn't bother with the troll cart system for the vaults. They brought large drilling machines and tunneled straight down. These were 8-meter contraptions, black market goblin devices, expensive and normally not sold to outsiders. The drills pulverized floors and walls toward the underground vaults. The plan was to smash through a vault door, grab the cup and other loot, and make a spectacular getaway. They even used a goblin-made spirit-taming headband to try to control the dragon beneath Gringotts. With it, they hoped to neutralize the dragon and speed their escape. The attackers planned to take a few visible treasures as distraction and then extract the real objective. But Dumbledore had anticipated something like this. A prearranged spell hidden in one vault detonated as they broke through, a powerful freezing charm that temporarily petrified everyone and everything in range. It delayed the raiders for 3 crucial minutes until the more powerful Death Eaters managed to break the paralysis. Worse for the attackers, the spirit headband failed. The old dragon, its vision nearly gone but still dangerous, shook the device loose and unleashed a ferocious stream of fire. Several raiders were diverted to deal with it. The Goblin Guard finally arrived and fought the invaders while the attackers tried to breach the vaults. The tide turned when the foreign wizards Dumbledore had summoned intercepted the fleeing thieves. Fierce fighting broke out above and below ground. In the end, most of the raiders were killed. Only 2 or 3 managed to escape. The operation was a disaster for Bellatrix's side. Many of her trusted Death Eaters fell, including her husband and her brother-in-law. Lucius Malfoy fell heroically, his body burned to a cinder. Bellatrix herself escaped overseas with 2 surviving Death Eaters, but returned to Voldemort maimed. She lost an arm and an ear. The Golden Cup did not end up with Bellatrix. It was seized by the foreign wizards who had intervened. Voldemort, staring at the crippled remnants of his followers, tightened his grip on his snake staff and unleashed a furious roar. Thanks to reader Xiao Dalosenren Turu Tian for the 500-point reward. Thanks to reader Xingye Liu Guang for the 200-point reward. Thanks to readers Dempasiwang Yodao Baijin Tatao Yi, Youyan Shu Tong Prinzo 7 for the 100-point rewards. Ted didn't know exactly what was happening with Lord Voldemort, but he understood what was going on closer to home. Lucius was missing. Draco found him like a ragged shadow of himself, nervous, panicked, trembling. His face was as pale as rice paper. Tears rimmed his eyes, though he fought to keep them in. Now that he was the head of the Malfoy household, his mother had only him to rely on. "Your father is missing?" Ted asked, puzzled. Draco nodded. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally forced out the words in a hoarse voice. "The day Gringotts was attacked." Ted's expression darkened. "Did he say anything before he left?" Draco swallowed hard. "He said the Dark Lord had been looking for him. He'd been spending a lot of galleons, said he had business. He told me if one day he wasn't around, I should take care of Mum and uphold the Malfoy name." It was almost a premonition. Draco closed his eyes tightly to keep from breaking down. He had to be strong. He was the head of the family now. Seeing him in such pain made Ted uncomfortable, but there wasn't room for pity to derail plans. Ted tried to steady him. He didn't tell Draco everything. Lucius had wanted Draco tempered by hardship, but he couldn't leave him without support. "Don't show panic," Ted said. "Even if things are bad, you can't let them see you fall apart. The Ministry and Gringotts would use any excuse to press down on the Malfoys. If the Patriarch is gone and the family looks weak, they'll be picked apart." They talked through practicalities. Ted suggested Draco present the family to Sirius's House of Black for backing. With the Blacks behind them, at least in the short term, the Malfoys would be protected. It was harsh but effective. Forced to grow up overnight, Draco steeled himself to carry on the name. With Ted's help, things might be survivable. He had no choice but to grow up fast. Meanwhile, Dumbledore's operation had been a success. He'd eliminated several Death Eater holdovers and recovered another Horcrux, the Hufflepuff Cup. Dumbledore had been surprised. First the Ravenclaw diadem, then the locket, now the Golden Cup. If the Sorting Hat and the sword hadn't fallen into his hands, Voldemort would have claimed them too. Voldemort had deliberately chosen Founder's relics for Horcruxes, powerful, symbolic artifacts whose accumulated meaning could be twisted into potent magic. That was how he had raised himself to legendary status in middle age. Except for the diary, which had been careless, the other Horcrux choices had been deliberate. A few days after Dumbledore intercepted the cup, he sought Ted out in person. Ted was surprised. Ever since they set the Black Eats Black plan in motion, Dumbledore and Voldemort had been playing out their war remotely. A personal visit was unusual. Dumbledore said little and handed Ted an object. The Ravenclaw diadem. Ted couldn't hide his surprise. "It's been made safe," Dumbledore said, calm as always. "Ravenclaw and Helena chose to leave their legacy to you. The diadem should belong to you." To Ted, he almost laughed at Dumbledore's generosity. For Dumbledore, it was more commemorative than useful. Ted inspected it like someone expecting a trap. He cast protective charms on himself, checked every ward, and finally relaxed. Dumbledore had spent nearly 2 years finding a way to separate soul fragments and dark arts from the artifact, preserving the diadem without the Horcrux taint. The diadem's effects were modest but useful. Enhanced wisdom, a bonus to intelligence, a small boost to magical resistance and power, and a sharp magic analysis ability that made the wearer highly sensitive to spells and able to analyze magic quickly. Practically, Ted knew limitations applied. The diadem couldn't push his intelligence above the game's cap, so it would only add what he hadn't already reached. Some bonuses were wasted where he already maxed out, but the magic analysis alone would speed his research. Ted had been making progress in his soul experiments and was tempted to try restoring fallen entities, except he'd made a critical mistake. He hadn't kept the bodies. That omission nagged at him. Then the world erupted with other news. The Ideal Land Forum posted faster and more accurately than the Ministry. Dinosaurs had started appearing in the rainforests of India, Southeast Asia, and South America. It was 1995. Cameras were everywhere. Images and footage spread instantly. It wasn't just a single discovery. Dinosaurs were suddenly turning up across continents. Muggle scientists rushed in. The Muggle reaction was explosive and impossible to stifle. Governments and media spun the story, bringing in world-renowned scientists to explain it away in ways the public could digest. "We've been studying this for years," the spokespeople said. "You saw Jurassic Park. That was our way of easing people into the idea." They framed the return of ancient life as Earth renewing itself, a cause for wonder rather than fear. Billboards, newspapers, TV segments, everywhere people saw narratives that normalized the phenomenon. Wizards were frustrated. They had spent months racing to contain otherworld incursions, running day and night, and the Muggle disclosure undermined their work. But the Muggles had scored a political win. Public morale soared, and even Fudge, who was thinking in political terms, saw the advantage. The world with dinosaurs was more colorful, more sensational. The immediate worry was that no one hoped a Tyrannosaurus or a flying pterosaur would decide to storm human cities. As the Muggle side celebrated, other, stranger incursions continued. In the Scottish Highlands, a new intelligent otherworld race appeared. Boarmen, upright wild boar-like creatures with magic and a structured culture. They wore refined armor and carried intricate weapons. They planted enormous magical thistles that could wrap around a mountain, letting them seize a peak in days. The Ministry debated how to treat them: intelligent, advanced in their own way, aggressive and arrogant. Goblins and merfolk seemed simpler by comparison. School was starting. The book list arrived, and Hermione took the opportunity to come to Diagon Alley and to Ted's flat. "I told Mum I needed to shop," she said when she arrived. "What do you need?" Ted asked. Hermione rummaged in her small bag and then dropped her voice. "What I need most right now is you." She wrapped her arms around him, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. They'd only been apart a week. Hermione was new to this and greedy for time together. "I told Mum I won't be back for 2 days. Ted wanted to make her happy. "What about the umbrella?" "I didn't bring it," she confessed. "It's fine. We don't need it. Just stay here." Hermione's warmth made the rest of the day unnecessary. They didn't even go out to buy anything. A ping interrupted the moment. Ding. Talent, Otherworld Knowledge triggered. Discovered, Spirit Orb Development Manual, blue. The Spirit Orb Manual recorded a spiritual power attack method invented by a minor king of the underworld. It was blue quality and required experience to exchange. Ted didn't get excited by blue items as he used to. He was ready for purple quality. Still, the manual was practical. It explained how to construct and compress spiritual power and how to launch and propel it. Ted tried it. A fist-sized magic sphere on his fingertip, condensed to the size of a ping-pong ball, glowed brilliantly, and when he launched it at a target, it tore it apart. The technique's ideas, magic compression, structural changes, and special launch methods, had broad applications. Ted shared the discovery with Ron, Harry, and Hermione. They were immediately buzzing. Ron saw it boosting his magic gun and thought of using the launching technique to solve earlier propulsion problems. Harry was even more excited. She wanted to reshape her great handprint technique to make it denser and harder hitting. The Blazing Dragon Crescent Slash could become devastating. She already used magic bullets and liked efficient, direct power. This method would make her a threat at both range and in close quarters. Hermione saw ways to upgrade many of her summoning and utility spells with variations that would increase effect and lethality. None of it was tested yet, but the ideas promised a lot. There was no time for experiments that day. School began. As fifth years, they no longer took the Hogwarts Express. The group apparated into their secret base through the fireplace. Ted slid out and heard Ron complaining immediately. "You made Malfoy head boy. Do you think he can do it?" "No way!" Neville and others chimed in agreement. When they saw Ted, they nudged each other and joked, "Quick, change the subject. My ears are getting calluses." Jerry grumbled about not having been head boy or head girl, and later heard gossip that Lavender had fallen in love with someone new. He sighed with relief about his saved chapters of a favorite novel and declared that when he never had to worry about money again, he'd lie in bed and read every day. No one would make him write another word. When Jerry heard the bad news, he immediately forgave his dear brother for tormenting his ears all morning. "I misunderstood you, my good brother," he teased. "I thought you were just looking down on Malfoy, but it turns out you had something painful to get off your chest. Malfoy was just the venting. You should have told me earlier. Let me enjoy the show too." Jerry wasn't actually surprised by Ron's heartbreak. As Ron's older brother, he knew the whole story. It had been a case of youthful ignorance and first love. Back then, Ron had charmed Lavender by bragging in the hospital while she was recovering from being petrified. Her adoration and pursuit won him over. Ron thought, this must be love, and he misjudged what the future would bring. That phase only lasted about a year. Once Ron got obsessed with mech development and building a transforming knight armor, things frayed. It was a clash of values. Lavender wanted the classic elite wizard future, showing up at events, shining as a model student, then going into the ministry or a prestigious firm. Ron, from a very poor family with 6 or 7 siblings, wasn't cut out for that world. His hobbies were niche, anime and internet culture, and he resented elitism. They debated it again and again. The problem came to a head when Ron showed up in a masked rider costume on Christmas, earning heaps of envy from male classmates and Lavender's disapproval. "Christmas is important," she snapped. "What nonsense is this? So childish. Can't you do something more mature?" Ron thought, "Mature, huh? Got it," and tried to compromise. For a while, they were fine. Meanwhile, Ron worked out with Neville and Ted at the Black Lake every day and became as solid as a rock. But the core issue remained. Their values were incompatible. She came from a family that wanted an elite path. He came from the opposite background. When you're young, you only care about love. As you grow, worldview and priorities matter. Either you're kindred spirits or one of you adjusts. Otherwise, it won't work. Jerry always joked that Lavender was like a spiritified vacuum cleaner. When she was in the mood, she pounced at the dining table and sucked you dry, like a demon draining life force. It was terrifying, and while the two of them seemed happy, everyone else found it odd. It was time to stop putting their relationship on display. There were early signs over the holidays. Jerry and his childhood sweetheart Sherry were busy with their own thing, and then trouble started back in their village. Jerry was running around and missing get-togethers. Ron, poring over plans from Ted, sunk into his research and ignored Lavender. She started the silent treatment. If only he focused on combat-worthy magic mechs, it might have been different, but he kept thinking about that flashy, broken knight armor. Lavender finally asked the fatal question, "Are you choosing me or the armor?" Once she'd built him up into her idol, everything changed. Ron was so absorbed in modifying the machine that he didn't choose. Ted later muttered, "So I was the culprit all along?" Lavender responded by posting pictures of an outing with a young man from a French wizarding family, a longtime family friend, on her Ideal Land social feed, with all the insinuating captions, "5 generations of family friends, almost engaged when we were little, gentle and considerate, so good at taking care of people." The whole point was to make Ron jealous. Ron wasn't a simp. He was hurt, but he didn't wallow. He messaged and broke things off. Decisive, as ever. Lavender exploded. "If you're going to break up, then break up. You didn't even try. You don't love me at all." By the start of term feast, the Great Hall was packed. The two who used to sit practically glued to each other now had 7 or 8 people between them. They barely made eye contact. People say friends should try to reconcile, but when things are that personal, advice feels intrusive. Ted and the others exchanged looks and decided to pretend it wasn't happening. Campus romances rarely last beyond graduation anyway. That night, there was other business. Dumbledore's seat at the professor's table was empty. Unusual, but McGonagall could handle things. She began the sorting, and the long line of first years took seemingly forever. After the sorting, she announced appointments and other notes for the year, the new head boy and head girl, and the student council presidents. Ted and his friends were in positions, so nothing to add there. Cedric from Hufflepuff had become male student council president, an able fellow who, unlike in some other tells, had not met a tragic end. Then, during the introductions to the year's courses, the doors to the Great Hall swung open. A short, plump woman in a pink suit dress, pink high heels, and flesh-colored stockings walked in. Her bobbed hair was clipped with a pink hairpiece, she carried a small pink handbag, and she wore heavy makeup that spoke of too much product. She looked 40 or 50, with a wide, loose-faced smile that tried very hard to be sweet. Ted, from across the hall, detected the faint smell of pearl whitening cream and wondered how much she had caked on. "Ah, hope I'm not too late," she said in a shrill, sugary voice, an old woman's attempt at girlishness. The noise made everyone in the hall shudder. She ignored McGonagall's cold stare and went straight to the center front seat. "Hello," she trilled. "I am your new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. My name is Dolores Umbridge, and I am also a senior undersecretary in the Ministry of Magic's Department of Education, assisting Minister Fudge with important matters." Because Professor Dumbledore did not appoint a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher within the required time, the ministry has the right to step in and appoint one, which is I, she purred. "I am delighted to meet you all. We shall be spending many good years together." She tilted her head and giggled in that grotesque, childlike way. It would have been cute in a teenager. In a woman of her age, it was appalling. Lee Jordan muttered under his breath, "Many good years? You won't live until next June." Ted snorted. Then, on impulse, he flicked a finger. The sentence, Lee's exact words, sounded again, louder and clearer, echoing through the hall. "Many good years? You won't live until next June." It repeated over and over, rising until it sounded like an entire chorus of voices. Umbridge's smile froze, and she demanded, Who said that? Deal with it." She waved a wand and tried to cast a spell, but sparks shot from the tip. A poof of smoke and a smudge later, Umbridge's face was blackened, as if she'd had a disastrously botched beauty treatment, and her hair had singed. McGonagall suppressed a laugh and asked concernedly, "Miss Umbridge, are you all right? A miscast spell can be dangerous." Umbridge, humiliated, flung accusations at McGonagall. "You're mocking me," she hissed, then abandoned all pretense of girlishness and fled the hall in tiny, furious steps. McGonagall watched her go, puzzled. Didn't she know where her office was? With the interruption over, McGonagall called the feast to order. Ron ate like a man trying to heal a wound, voraciously. His friends figured that if he could still eat, the heartbreak wasn't destroying him. The first years, exhausted and starved by the long sorting, devoured dish after dish. When the leftovers were getting out of hand, McGonagall waved her wand and cleared the plates away. Then came the traditional school song. McGonagall had hoped to sing the original tune in Dumbledore's absence, but the students didn't know it, so they sang in whatever tunes they preferred. The Weasley twins went all out, their 7th year and their last chance. The biggest moment, however, belonged to Ted. By the end of the song, no one was really singing anymore. Everyone was watching him. Ted belted the words out to the tune of the Good Man song, a spur-of-the-moment choice inspired by the Pink Toad's earlier entrance. It was raucous and irreverent and suited the mood perfectly. Outside the Great Hall, the students discussed the new ministry-appointed professor in hushed, horrified tones. "I can't believe we're stuck with her for a whole year," someone said. "Why isn't Defense Against the Dark Arts optional?" "It's required," replied another. "She made me lose my appetite," someone else confessed. "Every time I hear that voice, I tremble." "I just hope the curse on the post activates soon," said another, and a dozen students silently agreed. But wishes don't change reality. The next day, Umbridge held her first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Gryffindor and Slytherin shared the morning lesson. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were scheduled together in the afternoon. Umbridge spent the morning denigrating previous defense tutors, calling them cowards who ran away, then announced that she would not repeat their mistakes. She would remain and teach. She claimed their teaching was misguided, even harmful, and then set a ridiculous assignment. Students were to copy text out of a book. Harry, furious at her insults toward Lupin and at the reduction of the subject to rote copying, argued that Defense Against the Dark Arts should include practical magic. Umbridge, with her fake smile clamped on, wasn't impressed. She kicked him out of class and gave him a week's detention. Evenings in her office for re-education. In the afternoon, Umbridge continued her regimen with Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, more copying, more denunciations of Hogwarts. Ted found the whole thing a waste of time and increasingly nauseating. Then, in the middle of her lecture, the classroom filled with a ridiculous chant. A big pink lotus, and on it a toad. The toad croaks, climbs on the big pink lotus. 8 big pink lotuses and 8 toads sitting on them. One student couldn't help herself and snorted. The laughter spread until the whole room was roaring. "Pink toad? Ha-ha, that's perfect!" Umbridge lost her composure. "Who said that? Stand up!" she shrieked. But the sound wasn't coming from a single student. It was an illusion born of quick-thinking minds and a certain easygoing mischief. Every time she tried to respond, a chorus of toads croaked back. She fled the classroom, the chorus of croaks following her down the corridor into every corner of the school. Ted closed his book and decided then and there, this class was a waste of time. He would go to McGonagall and ask to be excused. He wasn't going to subject himself to a year of that pink toad's lessons. 389. I'm a toad. At dinner, Ted slid a small, mirror-like object across the table to Harry. It was only 3 centimeters across. "Are you going to Umbridge's office for detention after dinner?" he asked. "Yes, it's disgusting." Harry stabbed a piece of steak on her plate with her fork as if it were Umbridge's face. "Then take this with you," Ted said, handing over the item. Harry took it, looked at it, smoothed her bangs. "What is it? A compact?" Ted chuckled. "It's an amulet that reflects many kinds of evil dark arts. Umbridge will try to assert authority over you. Her detention isn't well-intentioned. Take it with you. I hope you won't need it, but if she means harm, let her feel the consequences of her own tricks." Later that evening, Harry knocked on Umbridge's office door and pushed it open. Come in, you ill-mannered black girl, Umbridge's sickly sweet, affected voice purred. If sounds had colors, her voice would be cloying pink. Harry's face tightened. Professor, my name is Harry Quinn Potter, not the black girl. Umbridge's office was decorated in the same fussy, syrupy style she favored. Leather chairs, flowery tea, and dozens of decorative plates with animated kittens spinning on them. Umbridge sat primly, teacup in hand, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. Oh, of course, dear Potter, she purred. How forgetful of me, so disappointing for you. Umbridge wasn't stupid. She had a sharp sense for humiliation and how to sting people most effectively. She had nothing of real generosity, only ambition. It was hardly common knowledge that she could cast the Patronus charm. She'd labored in secret for years to master it, because having a Patronus was a prestige marker in the ministry. Born of a Muggle mother and a low-ranking ministry cleaner with a squib brother, she had reinvented herself with ruthless calculation. She had worked her way into favor by flattering and, when necessary, manipulating older officials. In the chaos after the Azkaban break, she had been one of Fudge's most useful operatives, doing unpleasant work the minister wanted kept at arm's length. For that loyalty, she had been sent to Hogwarts, a political nail hammered into the school to check Dumbledore's influence. Her girlish affectation and prim, syrupy manner were habits she could not drop. All right, Umbridge said, setting down her teacup. It's getting late. Let's begin. Given your conduct in class, you must accept punishment, she said, producing a spotted quill. You will write, I am a bad child 100 times. She smiled with high, apple-cheeked cheer, but her eyes were flat. It's a small punishment, just a warning. I expect no more shouting in class. Yes, Professor, I understand. Harry took the quill calmly. A faint magical hum flickered across the room. Harry, always sensitive to such things, registered that this was no ordinary pen. It felt like a dark arts item. She glanced at Umbridge as she dipped the quill and began to write, I am a bad child. The moment the ink touched the parchment, Umbridge gave a shriek like something squeezed underfoot. Harry finished the sentence in neat, ornate script and looked up. Professor? What's wrong? Are you all right? What happened to your face? She asked, the concern in her voice genuine. Umbridge couldn't answer. Pain made her hands flutter to her cheeks, but she dared not touch the wound. A deep, raw gouge had opened across her face, from the left side of her forehead down to the right side of her chin, spelling, in jagged, burned letters, I am a toad. The flesh beneath looked ragged and red, as if cut by knives, yet no blood flowed. Terror flared in Umbridge's eyes. Could she be permanently disfigured? Her wailing was high and dry. Call someone, quickly, call someone. Professor McGonagall arrived at once. Umbridge wailed. It's her. This despicable, evil, dark wizard attacked me. Harry was stunned. Professor, I didn't attack you. It was you. You're the only one here. Shameless little hussy. Silence. McGonagall's voice cut through the room like a lion's roar. Her anger was immediate and fierce. You are a professor, and you will not insult a student. Have you no shame? For a moment, Umbridge was cowed, the pain forgotten in the face of McGonagall's fury. I have evidence. I have a memory crystal here. McGonagall took it and played it back. The recording was plain. Umbridge had handed Harry the spotted quill and instructed her to write. The immediate effect, however, had appeared on Umbridge herself. McGonagall's expression hardened. I saw nothing but you using a dark arts item and punishing a student unlawfully. I will be filing a complaint with the ministry. For now, stop your wailing and come with me to the hospital wing. Back in the dormitory that night, Harry could not sleep for excitement. She took out the Ideal Land two-way mirror and blew up the story for her friends. Ted, your thing worked perfectly. The quill backfired. I am a toad appeared across her face like a knife wound. It's so satisfying. That woman actually tried to sow discord between me and my family. Damn her. She recounted the whole episode and lavished praise on McGonagall. I only realized today that Professor McGonagall is the most reliable person at this school. From now on, she's my idol. Professor McGonagall is strict, but she protects us. Jerry, I hope Professor McGonagall becomes headmistress someday. Ron, Professor McGonagall is basically Big Hermione. Ted watched the chat and thought about Dumbledore. He should have seen this coming. If the school went without a new, well-chosen teacher, Fudge would seize the chance to place his own people. What kind of people would the minister's allies send? Incompetent or vicious ones. It looked increasingly as if Dumbledore had allowed the ministry some influence. Why? Perhaps so his students would learn firsthand the ugly face of bureaucracy and hypocrisy. Whether intentional or not, by the time Umbridge left, the students' opinion of the ministry would be ruined. School children from first years to seventh are the future. Their contempt would be a public shaming of Fudge's government. Umbridge did not attend classes the next day. She was unwell. Word had spread. Fred, George, and Lee Jordan had made sure of that, and students packed the hospital wing to gawk. Whether Madame Pomfrey had helped or Umbridge's quill was simply powerful, the result was the same. The wound would not heal. The scarred letters on her face stayed raw and painful. Madame Pomfrey prescribed a potion brewed by Snape with murtlap essence as the primary ingredient. It would take half a month of careful application to remove the marks. Until then, she could only manage the pain with analgesic potions and wear a veil. Seeing Umbridge teaching behind a veiled hat, and the hat and veil were pink, only proved her uselessness to many. She could not fix her own mess and had to rely on other teachers' help. The ideal landforms filled with scorn. What kind of witch was she if she couldn't even deal with the problem she created? Let her go 10 pigs, people joked. Even Slytherin felt the ripple. The house had been quieter the past 2 years. They still controlled the Quidditch Cup, and the House Cup had alternated among the houses. Their internal politics were messy. Some lines of descent fed into Death Eater sympathies, some into ministry careers, some into old pure-blood pretensions. Without a single strong leader, someone like the elder Tom, they splintered. Umbridge's arrival had invigorated the ministry-aligned students, but her incompetence showed the danger of letting ministry influence into the school. If this was the sort of hand the ministry extended, perhaps the students thought it ought to be cut off. Meanwhile, everyday gossip moved on. Hey, have you heard? Lavender and Undro from Hufflepuff are seeing each other. Who? A third year. Blimey, robbing the cradle. Half a month after Ron and Lavender split, Lavender had found someone new. Jerry eavesdropped eagerly. Brother, congratulations, your ex is moving on. Ron was not pleased. He fired off a message about Lavender's French pretty boy childhood friend. Lavender, ha, he's all looks, he's not even as good as you. Ron chewed on that bitterly. When love ends, people move on faster than expected. That night, Ron got blind drunk. Fire whiskey from the Three Broomsticks, bought through Ansu in Hogsmeade. Jerry, forced to sip, coughed as if he'd swallowed a furnace. Stumbling around, Ron rambled about the landlady at the Three Broomsticks, the buxom one who'd first made his innocent boyhood heart flutter. She carried the ale like this, and her figure was something else, he slurred, gesturing grandly. The story was both crude and oddly earnest. Jerry egged him on. What men fear most is betrayal after trust, a cold heart after effort, estrangement after closeness. Brother, be strong. Ron bellowed hoarsely. I broke up with her. When drunken Ron was finished elaborating on his romantic misadventures, first love gone sour, never love again, then the Three Broomsticks landlady and her rear in exhaustive detail, Jerry and the others laughed until they were breathless. Jerry teased half in jest about physical development and asked Ted if he had any boosting recipes. Ted joked back that half the credit for Hermione's poise belonged to him. Harry, looking down at her own feet in the Great Hall, sighed. She had gotten taller, but not bustier. Small was still the word on everyone's mind, and teasing followed. Why do you men all like big ones? Harry demanded belligerently. Ron didn't even look up from his plate. We have small ones ourselves. Laughing, Jerry clapped. Ron added, with the drunken candor of someone half asleep. But Harry, you don't need to worry. You don't have breasts. Wham! A punch to the arm. Malfoy, watching, felt his own crisis of preference erupt. I like small ones. Wham! Another punch. Neville stammered and babbled under the pressure, and Jerry patted him on the shoulder. Congratulations, Neville, you've learned to lie. Wham! Another punch. There is some science in the chaos. When people fall in love, their brains flood with hormones, phenylethylamine among them, that create infatuation and pleasure. That rush, which makes you desperate to be near the other person, generally peaks and then fades over months or a few years. Humans aren't designed for unbroken, eternal infatuation. The vows people love to recite about never leaving one another are romantic defiance of biology more than a reflection of it. If you want true commitment, you have to choose to go against instinct, make a deliberate pledge, not rely on a chemical high. 390. Remnant rubbing of Rui Treasure Book. Chapter 3 Treasure Tome Rubbing. Incomplete. Purple. Barty, how are you feeling now? Ted asked. He closed his eyes as if to rest, but he was actually contacting his butler, Barty. I'm very well, master, came the reply. On the other end, Barty paused his work and pretended to think. So how are things with you? I'm currently the deputy head of the Ministry of Magic's office for the improper use of magic, Ted said. Oh, very impressive. You surprised me, Barty said. Thank you for the praise. It had to be admitted, Barty was a genius. Not only as a wizard, but as an administrator, he had real talent. A few months ago, Ted had used Sirius and Lucius's connections to get this returned-from-abroad young wizard a foot in the ministry. From there, Barty, relying on his own cunning and ability, had climbed into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He was now the deputy head of the Office for the Improper Use of Magic, an office under the most powerful department in the ministry, and he'd done it in under 3 months. Ted was a little surprised. Could he, without using mind power and relying only on guile and ability, have advanced that fast? Probably not. Ted wasn't cut out for office politics. He had no patience for the petty, endless maneuvering. Barty, though, he thrived in it. Of course, Barty's rapid ascent wasn't entirely meritocratic. The magic world and Muggle society had been in chaos. The ministry was short-staffed and shaken. Many capable wizards had been lost in the turmoil. In that environment, Barty's team handled reams of clerical work and even assisted Aurors in catching dark wizards who had begun acting recklessly against Muggles. 2 days earlier, when the ministry sent a delegation to Thorn Ridge to negotiate with the Boarmen, Barty accompanied them and took on dangerous tasks. He earned merit at a critical moment. Fudge, who'd spoken with him, knew Barty was eager for advancement and willing to follow orders. It was a time of need. A young, competent, and energetic deputy head was exactly what the ministry wanted. Ted also had a hand in it. He'd given Barty a flattering appearance. Judging by looks mattered in this world. If not for some lingering worries about Barty's true background, or if Fudge had been absolutely convinced of his loyalty, he might have been promoted even further. Ted had abandoned Lucius as a hidden pawn because he'd already placed someone more effective. And Barty couldn't be planted so blatantly under Lord Voldemort's nose. With Voldemort's power, he'd unmistakably see through Barty's artificial identity. Ted therefore chose a circuitous route, plant Barty in the ministry so he could rise, and if and when Voldemort gained momentum, Barty could defect to the Death Eaters. Defecting to the Death Eaters under Voldemort's banner is different, politically, from defecting to Voldemort in the eyes of the old families. It could be made to mean something useful. They chatted for a few minutes, exchanging scraps of intelligence, Fudge's recent moves, ministry reports of rising magical incidents, and rumors of otherworld phenomena. It was clear. Magical incidents and otherworld mysteries were spiking. Groups of people were proclaiming the Savior's arrival, the end of days, or forming strange cults. How many charlatans were fishing in troubled waters was impossible to tell. After Barty, Ted contacted Rita Skeeter. Unlike Barty, who, apart from an independent soul, had been physically created by Ted through human refinement techniques combined with space marine modification technology, and therefore answered to him, Rita remained an independent person. He couldn't reach her telepathically. She yearned for domination and control from deep down, but she was free. Ted therefore contacted her through dreams, using Ideal Land as a bridge. Ideal Land was essentially an extension of Ted's mind power, and it wasn't private. In recent months, the Spirit Crystal servant Puck had been the target of dozens of hacker attempts. Many curious wizards, having decoded part of Ideal Land's rune logic, wanted to poke at it. Ted's mind power monitored every move, but the interest was spreading. For safety and discretion then, Ted chose Dream Contact for Rita. He sent a little mental emoji, enough for Rita to understand. Cough, cough, a sound from her two-way mirror signaled a message. Rita picked up the mirror, glanced, and a flash of surprise crossed her face. "All right, leave the manuscript here. I'm tired. I'll read it later." The junior editor left. Rita bolted the door, reached into her blouse, and produced a gem-studded necklace, then began the ritual to fall asleep and enter a dream. Seconds later, she nodded off in her chair. "Ah, great master," she murmured as the dream took her. Outside, a lot had happened during the month since school started. Ted tracked developments through Barty and Rita. There's an old saying, if the sky falls, someone tall will hold it up. But you can't just let that tall person collapse. Sometimes you have to help hold it up yourself. So even though Ted publicly acted aloof about Dumbledore, he kept an eye on the old man's moves in private. Dumbledore was guileful. Letting him read one's thoughts could mean being recruited without pay. Ted was not eager to become another general marching into someone else's war. The Order of the Phoenix and some pro-Dumbledore factions from the International Confederation had set up strongholds in Denmark and nearby small countries. Despite that, Dumbledore's forces and Voldemort's had paused open hostilities. Both sides were wary. An all-out war might destroy the Death Eaters, but if Voldemort survived, his remaining followers would be free to unleash terror. The International Confederation and Dumbledore were focused on containing the Death Eaters and keeping them from spreading beyond Norway. The two sides were locked in a cautious tug-of-war in Sweden, not unlike the 10-year stalemate before Voldemort's first fall, when Dumbledore had to wait for the right opportunity. Ted watched the magic world and the Muggle world alike. Britain was a microcosm of the global otherworld incursions. New terrains, new plants and animals, and indigenous inhabitants from other worlds were appearing. The Boar Men were a typical example. According to Barty's first-hand report from Thorn Ridge, the Boar Men weren't a single unified people at all. Their architecture, clothing, customs, and conversation showed two distinct factions. One called themselves the Agamagan Boar Men, shorter with thick spiky bristles down their backs, led by a female shaman named Kargath Bristlespine. They worshipped an ancestor, a demigod-level boar. The other faction, fewer in number but more aggressive, were the Stone Tomb Boar Men, taller, stronger, wielding heavy weapons like meteor hammers and rarely wearing armor. Their leader was the White Boar King, a towering figure Barty photographed at 3.2 meters tall. They worshipped someone called the Wumma Cult Master. Because the matter concerned Boar Men internal affairs, the ministry envoys had been cautious. Still, Barty learned that Kargath had persuaded the White Boar King to merge the clans. Together they became formidable and able to carve out a foothold in the newly transformed landscape. Back in London, the Wizengamot convened, and after analyzing the intelligence, decided to recognize the Boar Men as a new magical race and allocate them the mountains and nearby territory they had already taken. Ted's grading suggested Kargath was at least a level 15 shaman, and the White Boar King was likely level 17 or higher as a magic warrior. In any world, politics bend to power. The strong get treated differently. Spain showed the opposite extreme. There, a small tribe of scaled, lizard-like newcomers calling themselves Dragonborn appeared near a swamp. With only 60 or so members and no powerful wizards, the Spanish ministry wiped them out as a threat, claimed they had occupied land without permission, and rounded them up for confinement and exploitation. The responses to new peoples varied wildly between countries. Meanwhile, familiar landscapes were changing worldwide. New terrains, strange flora and fauna, dinosaurs breeding again. Even where climate and oxygen no longer favored them, dinosaurs proliferated. Herbivores chewing through jungles and carnivores raiding farms, sometimes clearing dozens of cattle at a single strike. A pterodactyl reportedly nested on the Empire State Building. Europe fared somewhat better, but Southeast Asia and South America were struggling. Local authorities deployed special units to cull dangerous dinosaurs. A bizarre social movement rose up in defense of dinosaurs. Protesters sat in the road with banners reading, "Dino Lives Matter," blocking armored vehicles. The loudest protest leader had a tragic irony. Her mother had been taken by a velociraptor while collecting laundry at dusk. After 5 hours of searching, the police recovered only a single leg. Dinosaurs have the right to live, some said, and to eat. Then, the system pinged in Ted's head. Ding. Talent, otherworld knowledge, triggered. Discovered. Rui Treasure Scroll. Rubbing incomplete. Rui Treasure Scroll rubbing. Incomplete purple. Contained fragments of divine abilities from the Heavenly Court's secret canon, the Rui Treasure Scroll of the Nine Heavens Secret Scrolls. It was a private rubbing made by Yuan Gong on a stone wall in Baiyun Cave on Yunmeng Mountain, later hastily copied. Exchange required 1,850 experience points. September 1st came on schedule, and with it a new piece of otherworld knowledge. It was an unexpected surprise for Ted. Purple quality. With a description referring to Heavenly Court's secret canons and divine abilities, it felt almost too fantastic to be only purple. Shouldn't something like this be gold? But color aside, Ted would exchange for it. A few days' experience points were nothing. As with previous gains, the new otherworld knowledge didn't simply download into his mind. Ted experienced it. He felt himself as a child. No, he saw from a child's perspective, watching himself work. Inside a cave, a little boy used Schwan paper to rub characters into neat sheets and bind them into a book. On the stone wall, 10,000 golden gleams seemed to shimmer. Cloud runes twisted and blurred if you looked too closely. Only after a long while did Ted come fully awake and sit up. Then it clicked. This material was related to the legends of demon suppression. The legend of suppressing demons, the legend of the three Suis-suppressing demons, a book of miracles. Yuan Gong, the white ape who had attained enlightenment in the spring and autumn and warring states era under the Nine Heavens Xuannu, had been appointed a librarian in heaven. He couldn't bear to keep those divine abilities sealed, so he secretly engraved the secret text onto a stone wall. For that, he was punished by the heavenly law. What had been left behind was a botched copy. The rubbing on the paper was sloppy, the print imperfect. Ted had seen the egg-born boy throw the poor copy on the ground. No wonder it was only purple quality. It was a shabby, monkey version copy. The Rui Treasure Scroll recorded 108 divine abilities, 36 heavenly stars, and 72 earthly fiends. Ted had acquired 3 so far, 1 heavenly star and 2 earthly fiends, summoning wind and rain, ingestion, and transformation. Transformation magic brings to mind the great sage Sun's 72 earthly fiend transformations, the ability to shift into countless forms, hide in plain sight, and exceed the 3 calamities and 6 disasters. With enough cultivation, one could transcend the 3 realms and the 5 elements, unmoored from ordinary life and death cycles. But transformation was only one branch of a broad category. Ingestion covered alchemy, qigong, and breath control methods, basically any technique that used external substances to augment the body. Elixirs, natural treasures, methods of supplementing oneself with things from outside. Roughly 90% of cultivation manuals fell into this category. Summoning wind and rain, however, was a different matter. It was a genuine great divine ability, the power to influence the vast cycles of water and weather. In Journey to the West, the heavenly water contests and the rain-praying duels were not trifles. When a river dragon was asked to make it rain, the margin for error was 0. One miscalculation and a head could roll. Manipulating rain involves the world's water chi circulation itself. This was a top-tier technique, not something minor magics could touch. 391. People from Another World. Ted had received a purple-quality gift package, and he was absolutely delighted. There were only 3 divine abilities and some spells inside, but each one was powerful enough to set a wizard on the path to legend. Still, after a week of study, Ted had to admit they were difficult. He'd previously scratched the surface of high-end fields, mind, dream, soul, ceiling, but those had been only superficial explorations. These 3 new divine arts were genuinely celestial, passed down from the heavenly court. They were truly advanced. Ted spent a full week on research, and, combining the new techniques with his old breathing methods, he managed only a few glimmers of understanding in the art of ingestion. He hadn't felt this baffled by unfamiliar knowledge in years. His previous research experience didn't translate cleanly into this Eastern system. He'd probably need to find inspiration in that one-time Taoist knowledge, he'd acquired. Eastern fantasy ran on its own internal logic. The Western magical approach didn't always apply. After a quick survey of the 3 abilities, Ted set aside the call wind and summon rain from the heavenly court arts. That stuff was too high-end. It could wait until level 18 or 19. For now, ingestion and transformation were more promising. With his existing foundations, he might make real progress. He sighed, "Too much. I can't research it all. I really can't." How to get more people to help with research? Ted's mind wandered to the ideal land. What about building a nationwide online game? Let everyone fight monsters, level up, research magic and related fields in the game. It was a wickedly capitalist thought. Mobilize everyone's spare effort for his own gain. During this time, Umbridge's face finally healed. After such a humiliating loss, she'd been withdrawn for a while, still twitching at the thought of the pain whenever she picked up a quill. Ted had mostly stopped attending Defense Against the Dark Arts, taking leave with the excuse of assisting the Ancient Runes professor in in-depth research. Umbridge was displeased, but she kept it hidden. Ted was no ordinary student. She'd even tried to interfere with Sirius's adopted daughter and other influential purebloods, so she had no hesitation with lesser pupils. But Ted wasn't a mere child. Ever since the Basilisk incident 2 years ago, his name had begun to ripple through the British wizarding world. The events of the last couple of years, especially the Ideal Land and his Triwizard Championship, had propelled him toward legendary status. Fudge's attitude toward Ted was ambiguous. He wanted to recruit this dazzling new star of the magic world for his own support, yet he also feared him. That contradiction left Fudge unsure how to act, and Umbridge's behavior reflected that caution. She didn't dare touch Ted. Besides, given Ted's performance in the Triwizard tournament, even an Auror might not be a match for him. Who would provoke someone like that for no reason? Still, Umbridge was not by nature peaceful. After a fortnight of relative restraint, she returned to scheming, mainly recruiting allies. The professors were cold toward her, who wanted to be seen cozying up to her. That bitterness stung. She'd tried to ingratiate herself with Trelawney, whom she secretly despised, but the divination professor just muttered mystical nonsense and ignored her. Umbridge seethed. She had little success with the staff, but among students she found fertile ground. Many Slytherins, those with ministry connections, began to attach themselves to her. Though she was an insufferable pink toad, she was still a professor, and siding with her seemed safer for careers and family reputations. Umbridge indulged in clumsy office politics, filling her days with whispered plans and schemes, basking in the attention as if she were on a grand inspection tour. Those who saw her might think she'd already become Minister of Magic. Predictably, students grew to dislike her, attention in her classes slackened, and she was more than happy for that. She genuinely thought teaching violent things encouraged disobedience and rebellion. If only Potter's family hadn't learned those rebellious means, would her face have been scarred? She convinced herself they were dangerous. Meanwhile, the students were up to their own business. "Ted, I found something good," Jerry whispered from the kitchens. "What is it now?" Ron asked distractedly, dousing his chicken leg with hot sauce. Ron had been quieter lately, calmer, a touch more mature. Even his eating had taken on a strange refinement. Jerry leaned in conspiratorially. "I think I found Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets." The room went quiet. Neville, who had thought that phrase buried forever after their second-year nightmares, set his fork down. "Chamber of Secrets?" he managed. They had discovered Gryffindor's and Ravenclaw's secret chambers in the years since. But Hufflepuff? "How do you know it's Hufflepuff's?" Harry asked. Malfoy, tagging along and echoing Harry's skepticism, asked, "Was Hufflepuff's name on the door?" Jerry pointed. "Yes." They crowded around in the Hogwarts kitchens, beneath the Great Hall, underground. Beneath that underground, Jerry had somehow gotten lost during one of his midnight hunger walks and found another level down. There, under a strange staircase, he'd seen a stone door with Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets carved on it. Below that, in smaller letters, "Meeting in another world, enjoy the delicious food." "What does that mean?" Hermione asked. Ted shook his head. There was no way this was some food ordering slogan from a game. Everyone pressed against the door, trying spells, 18 different incantations, a handful of alchemy, potions and transfiguration tricks. Nothing reacted. Jerry even tried to bore a hole in the stone. His wand shot flames that roasted for 3 minutes without leaving so much as a scorch. "Madam Hufflepuff's anti-theft measures are impressive," Ron said. "Now what?" Malfoy asked. Are we just not finding the trick? Harry thought it over. If Madame Hufflepuff left a door in a chamber of secrets, she'd want people to find it. She probably wouldn't make the condition too obscure. Ron reached for the stone, feeling for a seam or knob. The door had neither handle nor keyhole. Jerry suggested, maybe that line of text is the password? What line? Ron read aloud, trying different cadences and inflections. Enjoy the other world. Meet delicious food. The door remained unmoved. You said it wrong, Jerry hissed, pointing at the inscription. It's meeting in another world. Enjoy the delicious food. They all spoke it together. The stone door rose like an elevator. Ted blinked. It opened simply by speaking the phrase. Madame Hufflepuff was straightforward. They hesitated, peering briefly inside, but not entering. The door clapped closed with a whoosh after a few seconds. Ron tried again, imitating the cadence. The door stayed shut. They tested it. Only when Jerry and Ted spoke the phrase did the door open. Why only you two? Hermione demanded. Ted shrugged a little. Maybe we have some qualities Hufflepuff liked. He didn't elaborate. He didn't want unnecessary curiosity. They decided to investigate. After gathering protective spells and equipment, they went in. The room itself was unremarkable, an 80-square-meter stone chamber with no windows and a ring of magical lamps set into the ceiling. An impressive bit of ancient enchantment, luxurious in an age of torches and oil. The chamber was full of kitchen utensils, aged but not useless, and one enormous iron cauldron dominated the space. The cauldron was impressive, about 1.2 meters across and 1.5 meters tall, round-bellied with 2 handles and 4 short legs, an ancient tripod-style pot that looked big enough to stew 3 children at once. And yet something was gently boiling inside despite no fire underneath. Ron inhaled deeply, eyes half closed. It smells amazing, he murmured, nearly drifting away. Ted ignored the stew for a moment and examined a wooden table nearby. It didn't look crafted, there were no joinery marks. It seemed to have grown into shape, transfiguration at a masterful level. Madame Hufflepuff was one of the founders, after all, and quiet she might have been, but she'd been clever. On the table lay a roughly bound parchment book, open and preserved by magic, its ink clear and its pages unmarred. Ted read, translating the Old English. The book was a cookbook. He read more, then looked from the pot to his friends. Hufflepuff left a legacy, he said. This is Hufflepuff's delicious iron pot. And this book, it's a cookbook. It sounded almost blasphemous, a founder's legacy being recipes in a cauldron. But the book explained more. Hufflepuff's chamber wasn't a conventional chamber in the castle or underground. It was a pocket of space contained behind the door. The door didn't open a chamber, it housed one. The Chamber of Secrets here was a small spatial fragment, accessible only by speaking the phrase. According to the text, Hufflepuff had discovered and transformed this pocket after other worlds began to press against their own. The earliest incursions of other worlds came 1,000 years ago, and she had adapted her space to meet them. The inscription's meaning, meeting in another world, enjoy the delicious food, was literal. The door's magic recognized visitors from other worlds. Jerry was from another world, and so was Ted. Only the two of them could open it. Chapter 378, The End of Magic. The enormous cauldron left by Hufflepuff could take simple, ordinary ingredients and, almost as if by habit, turn them into miraculous, magical dishes with all kinds of effects. It felt surprisingly like the cooking the house elves were doing for the school now. One pot of that stew could feed the whole school for a meal. Had it originally been used to cook for the students? Madame Hufflepuff had left behind a legendary cooking pot and a golden cup as well. And she'd left her recipes, casual notes that nevertheless contained valuable clues about the magical world 1,000 years ago. The founders' legacies were all gathered here, so even in the founders' time, there were convergences of other realms, Hermione said, reading the notes Ted had translated and organized. It must have been much subtler, though, so it didn't attract attention. Ted added, or maybe people just lived differently then. The population was smaller. Things that came through from other realms might have blended into everyday life without anyone noticing. The truth was probably impossible to recover now. Only a 1,000-year-old school like Hogwarts left traces. Where else would you go to look? Archaeological digs in ruined sites? That sounded like fairy work. Ted made a mental note to watch the fair folk more closely. Their strangeness might hide something important. Right now, both the wizarding and muggle worlds were in turmoil. He ought to plant more informants in the ministry. He'd been thinking of having Barty keep a closer eye on the goblins, too. There never seemed to be enough eyes and ears. Before he could put those plans into motion, the ministry beat him to it. Professor Umbridge swept into the great hall with her usual false smile and a parchment in hand. The students exchanged looks. Umbridge never ate in the hall. House elves brought meals to her office, but today she wanted an audience. She cleared her throat in that painfully high voice. Pointing her wand at her throat, she amplified it and announced, "In response to many earnest requests, I have repeatedly consulted Minister Fudge, and after multiple discussions, I have secured a valuable opportunity for you." A smattering of polite, eager applause started from the Slytherin table. Some students had already begun to ally themselves with her. The rest of the hall watched with varying degrees of disdain. Umbridge launched into her spiel about respecting authority, the greatness of the ministry, and how grateful the students should be that she had negotiated this opportunity for them. It was the same grandstanding as an online performer taking credit for everything. Her opportunity was a ministry internship program. The parchment bore the ministry seal and laid out Education Decree Number 2. Excellent students in 5th year and above could intern in various departments of the Ministry of Magic, getting practical experience and priority consideration for future employment. On paper, it was sound. People in the ministry were stretched thin. Ted knew how bad things were. Incidents were happening more and more frequently. Fatalities in the first half of the year had outpaced anything in recent memory. The Auror office was desperately recruiting and training new agents, and ministry officials at all levels were exhausted. Fudge, facing an election and a shaky base of support, also wanted recruits who could be cultivated into loyal civil servants. Expanding internships would let him nurture a cohort of dependable young people. But the problem, from Ted's point of view, wasn't the policy, it was who would decide who was excellent. That assessment fell to Umbridge. Once the announcement landed, the inevitable followed. Ravenclaw and Slytherin students, aware that their houses had strong representation in the ministry, were especially eager. Even without Umbridge's presence, students began pulling library stacks and forming study groups. The civil service exam atmosphere took hold. A 2-month scramble for a future job in the ministry. Ted watched all of it with thinly veiled irritation. Could the end of magic be civil service exams? He could hardly stand to see so many young people chasing a safe little future while so much else was at stake. He felt an obligation to pull them back towards something truer and more meaningful. Then he acted. The great hall buzzed with Umbridge's amplified, syrupy voice, until, suddenly, it was drowned by a loud, distorted copy of her own words turned into a chant. "I'm a pink toad. If you believe what I say, you're even dumber than a toad. One poke and you jump." Windows rattled with the sound. The parody, Ted's doing, used the same amplification she'd applied to herself, but twisted it into a mocking refrain that made it impossible to hear her. Students burst into laughter and cheers, especially the older ones who had long resented her. Umbridge's face went white. She dropped the parchment, hair disheveled, and stumbled out of the hall in her pink heels, shrieking counterspells that had no effect against a voice filling the room. She didn't teach for almost a week after that public humiliation, much to the students' delight. Someone even set the pink toad chant to music and circulated it. Still, the parchment remained up on the notice board. It was an official ministry directive, and it would be hard to undo. Students argued about the criteria for selection, especially the fact that Umbridge's subjective assessment would carry so much weight. Ultimately, most of them swallowed their dislike for her and started studying. Ted's annoyance settled into resolve. He couldn't let a small, safe goal like a ministry job be the only horizon for these kids. If they were going to prepare for a world that was changing faster than anyone liked to admit, they needed more than internships and exams. That night, in the secret base beneath the Ideal Land core server, Ted stood before a towering purple crystal. "Parker," he asked his tech specialist, "how are the preparations? We need to accelerate the Magic World project." My great and creative master, Parker said with mock deference. The preparations are complete. I'm ready to build this brand new magical virtual world. Ted had planned an online game to draw people in, help with research, and run simulations. Now it had to be brought forward. He wanted something more than simple faction PvP. People would tire of scheming against fixed NPCs. What never grew stale was scheming against other people. He decided on two major factions embedded in ordinary human society, working covertly to maintain order and security while dealing with endless interdimensional incursions. There would be external threats so severe that only cooperation could save the world, overlapping styles, conflicting dimensions, and all the dramatic tension players loved. I want big crises, he told Parker. Interdimensional invasions, ancient relics, lost ruins, things that push both cooperation and competition. Set up dark wizards people can really hate, and a realistic research and sub-profession system so players can actually conduct magical experiments in-game. Make relics and materials available through quests and guide players into research. Parker grinned. Outsource parts if you're too busy? Ted laughed. The best freeloading was convincing others to freeload for you without realizing it. The first expansion pack would be Molten Core, inspired by the fiery land from a few years back. He expected to spend the night coding, but Hermione sent a message asking him to come upstairs. Hermione, it's late, he said when he found her. Why aren't you in the dorm? I can't sleep, she said, evasive. He took her hand. Are you all right? She flushed and looked at him with that determined expression he knew so well. I'm not going back to sleep tonight. Not going back to sleep. Are you working on an experiment? He asked. She cupped his face and shook her head. Experiment my foot. Let's build an AI. She wanted to play. It turned out she'd been chafing at the slow growth of her magic. It had been over a month since anything significant had boosted her power. She'd stay up, and if Ted didn't move, she would. They spent the night together. Hermione didn't even go to breakfast the next day because Ted brought it up to her. It was Saturday. Thankfully, there were no morning classes that would suffer. By lunchtime, she looked radiant, like a flower freshened by dew. Harry kept asking what makeup she'd used. She just smiled and told him to be patient. He'd understand in time. Neville, by contrast, seemed pale and subdued. He pushed at a baked potato with his fork and looked sicker than even a late night could explain. Ron, between bites of chicken, couldn't help but ask, What's wrong? Is today's potato off? No, Neville said quietly. Jerry, another friend, had heard him talking in his sleep the night before. He said, This time it will definitely succeed. Ha ha ha. Neville's face went even grimmer. I had a nightmare. The table fell silent. When Neville had nightmares, it often meant something dire was stirring, and the thought chilled everyone. Over the last few days, the tension had been building. Ted felt it too. The state of things was getting worse again. 393. Trickery Witch. What did you dream about? Ted asked. Neville frowned, rubbing his temples with both hands. I can't remember clearly. My head's a mess, a blur. I remember strange noises, Voldemort laughing, and something caught by him. It looked like it meant a lot to him. I could feel his triumph, this terrible happiness. I saw a madwoman with one silver-white hand, and she had a big belly. Ted reached out and put a hand on Neville's shoulder, sliding his mind to where the images still fluttered. The visions were like a bad signal, blurry and distorted. Voldemort's face brimmed with ecstasy. In the corner of the image, a crazed woman laughed, clutching her belly, which was undeniably showing. Chich! Ted couldn't help the sharp intake of breath. Bella. Neville didn't know that this woman was the arch-enemy responsible for his parents' fate. The details jarred together oddly in Ted's head. Bella had been in the bank robbery earlier, had one hand broken, and now had a silver-white metal hand. Voldemort certainly had the means to make such things, but a big belly? Why would he allow that useless organ to remain? He doesn't even have a proper nose anymore. And how could this happen so quickly? Voldemort's laughter couldn't just be about Bella being pregnant, unless her husband had died in the robbery, and now there was some other reason to celebrate. It made no sense. None of it could be guessed by them. Let Dumbledore investigate. Voldemort laughing like that was never good. Dumbledore was silent for more than 10 seconds after Ted relayed the images through the two-way mirror. No wonder he's been so composed recently. I thought the theft of the golden cup had something to do with it. An investigation is certainly warranted. Oh, right. Dumbledore glanced at the two-way mirror in his hand. There are two things. First, Neville's condition is precarious. We must prepare. Ted rolled his eyes inwardly. Of course Dumbledore had found a pretext to give him work, a task he couldn't refuse. It involved the life of a friend. He wouldn't be at ease staying out of it. Dumbledore had a knack for holding people's hearts. The second thing, Dumbledore went on, the golden cup has been dealt with. I'm entrusting it to you for safekeeping. Perhaps because Dumbledore had learned the method from the diadem and the locket, stripping this third Horcrux had gone much faster. The soul fragment was destroyed. Hufflepuff's golden cup remained intact. A day later, Ted received the cup. 6 of them gathered around it and took turns examining the heavy, gleaming artifact. What's it useful for? Jerry asked. Ron laughed. Looks valuable to me. His eyes gleamed at the sight of gold. Hermione rolled her eyes. If you pour water into it, it won't turn into wine. This isn't a novelty. I thought it would be more powerful, Harry said, losing interest. Malfoy, oddly unimpressed, observed, objects like this are usually mementos preserved for posterity, little practical use. In the Malfoy family, heirlooms lay around like furniture. Ted nodded silently. What shall we do with it? Neville asked. Ted thought for a moment. How about we send it to the kitchens, leave it as a memorial for the house elves? They all agreed. The house elves had been taken in and cared for by Hufflepuff at the founding of Hogwarts. Preserving the cup in the kitchens would make sure Miss Hufflepuff would be remembered by those she had protected for generations. When Ted and his friends carried the cup downstairs, the house elves surged forward in a rush. In an instant, they were all crying, big, bright eyes, mop-sized tears pouring down their faces. The oldest house elf, who had once given the students a clue about the previous generation of guardians, was helped forward. Having an elder in the household was a treasure. His shriveled fingers trembled as he touched the golden cup, his face alight. Our ancestors told stories of the cup. Now we have seen it with our own eyes. Thank you. Thank you all. It's nothing, Ted and his friends demurred. The old elf waved a wrinkled hand. Actually, the lady left us something else, an heirloom. They weren't expecting more. Following the old elf into the inner room, he produced a bundle from a magic chest. He unwrapped layer after layer of cotton, revealing a kitchen knife. Ted blinked. His companions were as stunned. This was Hufflepuff's legacy. Nothing grand, just a knife. Slytherin left the Chamber of Secrets, a basilisk, heirlooms and dark relics. Gryffindor left the sorting hat, a sword, and a legacy of courage. Ravenclaw had her wisdom and artifacts. And Hufflepuff? Ted and his friends had already found a wok, a large stew pot, the golden cup, and now a kitchen knife. Ron lifted the knife. Despite its age, it still caught the light with a cold gleam. How many kitchen items did Miss Hufflepuff leave behind? If this continued, they half expected to find a whole set of legendary cookware. Hufflepuff had been a woman who loved to feed and care for others. The old elf sat and began to tell the house's history. Unlike the proud Slytherin, unlike the brave Gryffindor, and unlike the aloof Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff had been modest, plump, and warm. She taught herbology, cooked delicious food, brewed potions. When Hogwarts was founded, she handled logistics. The school's first house elves came under her protection. Those elves served, were cared for, and passed their service down through generations. The lady wasn't dazzling, nor distant, nor intimidating, the old elf said. She was like a mother, caring for every student, children who were outcast or mistreated by their Muggle families. She sheltered those the other houses wouldn't take. Until that moment, the founders had been vague names and symbols. But after the Chamber of Secrets and the other inheritances they'd experienced, Ted and his friends finally saw fuller faces behind those names. Hufflepuff's smile was simple and indispensable. Neville's voice, small and reverent, broke the silence. The founders, each of them was great. If I had a choice, I'd want to be like Ms. Hufflepuff, Hermione said softly. They all stared at her for a heartbeat. Hermione, the bookish know-it-all, wanting to emulate Hufflepuff rather than Ravenclaw. Ted grinned and hugged her. I believe you could. I want to be Gryffindor, Harry declared, punching the air with a grin, which made Malfoy grin wryly. Something in him always reacted. Ron fished some fried potatoes the house elves had offered from his pockets and handed them to Jerry. "I'll just be Ron, fine by me." Jerry accepted them solemnly. "Brother, you are truly one of a kind." Ron, "Are you complimenting me?" Jerry, "Probably. I'm not sure." Later, when the initial excitement had died down, Ted pulled Neville aside. "From today on, you have to learn occlumency," he told him quietly in their secret base. For now, there was no other way to deal with the fragment of Voldemort's soul in Neville's head. Neville didn't even know Voldemort was there. They couldn't let the connection persist. Voldemort had studied spirit and soul in ways unmatched in their world. If he discovered a link to Neville, he could try to control him. Even if that seemed unlikely, they couldn't risk it. A lasting soul connection could subtly reshape a person's mind. Ted's own mind power was proof that the will could be shaped and warped. Worse, the fragment itself was dangerous. If it regained strength, it might try to take over, like Tom Riddle's diary. The fragment in Neville was weak, more like a big-headed infant, its consciousness only occasionally clear. It had been an accidental creation, not a deliberate Horcrux, and so it was deficient. Still, it needed to be sealed off. Occlumency could do that. A permanent, disciplined skill, Snape had kept his mind closed year-round. With the technique, one could create emotions and false memories to deceive any intruder. The training itself tempered the will. Ted had another advantage. He was a mind mage. He could teach in ways even Snape hadn't. But he was careful. This was about safety, not glory. "I need to teach you the essentials and the precautions first," Ted said. "The aim is to cut your mind off from the outside. Willpower matters more than magic. You have to give it everything." "Resist me," Ted instructed during lessons. "Resist my probing." 2 hours of training left Neville exhausted, repeatedly having his mental defenses pushed and rebuilt. Feeling strength in him he couldn't always access wore him out. His robe was soaked with sweat. "That's enough for today," Ted said finally. "When you go back, meditate as I taught you. Restore your spirit. Don't get anxious. Stress will slow you down." Over the following days, Ted balanced his own research, watched the wider magical world, and continued teaching. Neville's talent wasn't flashy intelligence. He wasn't a quick-witted prodigy, but he had another kind of talent: stubborn perseverance. He practiced hard every day, and the progress showed. The training itself was forging his will, and will was everything in occlumency. To be extra safe, Ted made a mind-shielding pendant for Neville to wear while sleeping. With that on, the connection would be physically severed, no stray soul fragment, no other attacker could reach him. Better safe than sorry. In the blink of an eye, the month drew to an end. At dinner, Jerry nudged Ron. "Who've you been talking to all night? You chat for half the night. What's that about?" Everyone looked at Ron as if he'd found some secret online friend. Ron refused to answer, as stubborn as ever. Jerry brightened. Could it be Lavender? He'd heard Lavender had recently broken off another relationship. Ron, however, sat like an ascetic far past such entanglements. "A good horse doesn't eat old grass," he scoffed. "No chance." It was Halloween. They sat in their robes, equipment rattling under their belts, expecting something to happen, but nothing did, disappointing. Far below, at the edge of the forbidden forest, a patch of space began to twist like a static-filled television screen. It tore and flickered, a seam forming. Something was squeezing itself through. At dawn, a new month arrived. Ding. A knowledge triggered, discovered. Way of deception. Way of deception. Records on a mysterious woman named LeBlanc, an operative of the secret Black Rose organization, associated with cloning, illusions, and displacement, abilities that allow misdirection and elusive movement. This woman, of unknown age and true name, is called the Deceiver. Requires 950 experience points to exchange. The Deceiver, LeBlanc. Mahjong tile? Is this a passive tied to the Mahjong tile, or does it grant active skills too? Exchange it and see. Finally, I've made it to the next month. Woo-woo-woo. I've developed a psychological reflex from all this typing. Every time I start, I need to go to the bathroom. It's becoming conditioned. The so-called Gishu, the art of deception, magic that ordinary people could barely comprehend, was fascinating. Just as everyone breathed a sigh of relief that Halloween had passed without incident, trouble began stirring in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid was the first to notice. For 2 days, he'd been sensing that the forest's magical creatures were behaving oddly. There were disturbances on every patrol. At first, he suspected poachers. Whoever they were must have had a death wish. He widened his patrols and finally found a clue. Deep in the woods, closer to the mountains, many creatures were running wild and breaking established territories. Hagrid went to investigate and was set upon by two werewolves. Brutal, savage, they attacked without warning. Fortunately, Hagrid knew the forest like the back of his hand, and attacking him on his own ground was never easy. He was half giant, after all. Two wolves weren't likely to intimidate him. He also had gadgets Ted had made for him. In under 3 minutes, Hagrid had the two attackers howling and fleeing. He didn't chase them, though. He heard movement, many more werewolves. This had to be reported. Professor McGonagall and Ted were the first to know. Ted hadn't even finished lunch. "They tried to ambush me," Hagrid said. "Lucky I had that ice shield emblem you gave me, Ted, not a scratch on my coat." "You're wearing a leather coat in November?" Ted blurted. "Isn't it hot?" "There are a lot of werewolves in the Forbidden Forest, 10 at least," Hagrid said. Ted glanced at McGonagall. If Hagrid was right, this wasn't a small problem. When had they come? Where did they come from? What did they want? Could it be one of Lord Voldemort's schemes? Werewolves were often impoverished and poorly connected, and many among them harbored deep hatred for wizards and humans. Fenrir Greyback was proof of that hatred. He had bitten Remus Lupin as a child and ruined his youth. In the original war, Greyback sided with Voldemort. He was a ferocious presence who led attacks on Hogwarts. Even though Greyback was dead now, that didn't mean others couldn't be recruited. Ted had brought many werewolves through Lupin and experimental converts from those werewolf liberation movements. There were over 80 from several neighboring countries. Werewolf furniture sold surprisingly well abroad, and their brand was popular. There were real numbers behind them. That was why Lupin could serve as a magical advisor and be treated with respect. But if other werewolves had infiltrated so close to the school, "Don't let this leak," Ted said quietly. "Keep the students under watch. Professor Snape and I will investigate." "Not by yourself," McGonagall added. "Let Snape lead." Ted handed Snape a white crystal pendant, invisibility pendant. Snape sniffed it and sneered. "Put away your toys. I don't need them." He produced a thumb-sized vial, drank, and vanished in a ripple. Ted pocketed the pendant. "Old Bat, you're quite the actor. I gave you the formula for that invisibility potion." "I've improved it 3 times, Snape retorted. "Has nothing to do with you." They went deeper under the forest canopy, nearer the mountain. Ted handed Snape a small device. "Bamboo copter. It flies. Want it?" Snape took it grudgingly. "How do I use it?" Ted pressed the little propeller to Snape's head. The blades whirred silently, and the professor floated up. Snape stared at the toy for a moment, weighing dignity against convenience, then settled it in place with a scowl and took off. Ted had the snitch record the whole thing. He'd already imagined the headline, "The Old Bat has a cute day too." No wonder people loved flying. In 7 or 8 minutes they floated, unseen, to the mountainside. There, precariously perched on a ledge, was a castle. Not as vast as Hogwarts, but substantial. Several towers, the tallest 4 or 5 stories. At the foot of the mountain, a village clustered. Ted caught a whiff of something musky. "Smells like dogs," he murmured. They exchanged glances. "Professor, what do you think this is?" Ted asked. "Otherworld infiltration," Snape answered. "I didn't expect it to be so close." "Should we go in? We came for a reason, didn't we? You first." They moved stealthily toward the village. Snape's skills at subtleties of movement and scent were flawless. Ted didn't need to worry. They soon cornered a lone man in a small wooden cottage on the village edge. He looked human, pale, in archaic rural clothing, but both men recognized him as a werewolf. Ted's spirit detector registered it. Snape's nose confirmed it. As a potions master, Snape had a dog-like sense for such things. Snape used legilimency while Ted read the man's memories. The man knew little, but the two gleaned enough. The village called itself Pyrewood. It was cursed. Every villager had been turned into a werewolf. On full moons, they transformed uncontrollably, and the curse could spread without biting, apparently via the village's own curse. There were no other surviving settlements in the area. Villages were either cursed into werewolves or eaten. Pyrewood's people could keep some control only because of metal bracers they wore. Snape held up his hand. A metal bracer clung to his wrist, carved with a fanged wolf head. Sinister and mesmerizing, it seemed to breathe. A dark, bestial power, he observed. We don't have much intel on the castle, but I suspect this place is linked to Shadowfang Keep. Ted had guessed as much. He didn't know if Archmage Alugao was inside. An Archmage in game terms might not be a simple dungeon boss. He'd sent out over 100 insect puppets to scout. None had found Alugao. What they had found, though, was worrying. A huge number of werewolves and undead. Levels ranged from 5 to 9, some leaders at 12 or 13. The count neared 200. If it came to open battle, they'd need ministry support. They returned to Hogwarts and briefed McGonagall. She contacted Dumbledore. If possible, I don't want a public fuss, Dumbledore said after listening. I absolutely don't want fudge involved. We already have enough trouble. But how can we deal with so many dangerous creatures quietly? McGonagall protested. This is the equivalent of 200 trolls. Dumbledore looked at Ted and Snape. Ideal Land can overlay reality with a mirror world. Ted, can you cover that village and castle with a virtual overlay and deal with it there? Ted hesitated. We had a clash with Tom's Death Eaters yesterday. They're active. I can't go back to town right away. Then handle it your way, Dumbledore said. Ted smiled inwardly. If they could keep Voldemort from knowing, everything else would be manageable, he muttered to himself. Looks like Magic World will have an early closed beta. If they virtualize the site like Paris's Catacombs event, players could descend and clear monsters. It would be brilliant promotion. That afternoon, Ted pinned a message to the Ideal Land forum. Unique in the world, the first 5A-rated online masterpiece, Magic World, is coming soon to Ideal Land. Closed beta slots open tonight, first come, first served. He attached a short clip, a ruined castle, and dozens of snarling, green-eyed werewolves charging the camera. Ted requisitioned materials from the school to extend the Ideal Land net outside Hogwarts. The school would foot the bill. Under the Magic Net's comprehensive scan, Ted completed 2 quests, exploring the school and exploring the Forbidden Forest. The rewards: Extract Elemental Essence Red, a spell card that extracts elemental essences and requires Alchemy LV5, and Magic Sealing Chain Red, an item card, an iron chain that seals a target's magic. Note, farewell, Cage. That night, Ted opened 200 closed beta accounts. They were snapped up in 5 minutes. Under Parker's coordination, Great Britain took 80. 60 of those were current students, mostly third years and above. They would be the vanguard to farm Shadowfang Keep. Wizards adapted quickly. The students were naturals. They made characters, grabbed novice gear, and rushed at scarecrows, wolves, boars, and thieves. Everyone wanted the edge. Some players focused on quests and story, probing the few NPCs for clues, harassing the interactive NPCs until an irritable broom-swinging sister hit them. The NPC's mind power meant their AI felt startlingly alive. Closed beta bonuses ran wild. 10-fold experience, generous drops, swords and staffs appeared with a single click. Ted planned to start a public beta after Shadowfang was handled. He'd also seeded a difficult 5-ring quest that rewarded a pet, Softy. Softy would be invaluable for clearing Shadowfang Keep because it devoured undead and werewolf corpses. Ted liked efficiency. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or rather, get multiple uses from 1 fish. Players streamed themselves, joked, died. It was a one-life closed beta. Many lost painstakingly leveled characters to an unlucky hit and cursed for hours. Live streamers called attention to farm bosses like the Boar Princess, only to be gored by the pig and leave tombstones on the battlefield to haunt their channels. In a single night, Magic World exploded in popularity. Wizards on the internet were paying wildly for closed beta slots. Bids climbed to 50 galleons. The Magic World section on Ideal Land filled with strategy guides and monster hunting videos. Someone even made a hit series on romancing NPC sisters. He admitted it was his 5th character because the other 4 had been killed by guards. Watching the students and other beta players swarm into the virtualized Pyrewood village, Snape's expression turned from skepticism to something like dread. After a long silence, he said flatly, "Has anyone ever told you you're becoming more like the Dark Lord?" Ted blinked. "What? No. That's slander." In Snape's eyes, Voldemort was dangerous because of rage and madness. Ted was dangerous for a different reason, the danger you couldn't perceive. He manipulated systems like a player moving chess pieces. The pieces didn't even know they were on a board. The new generation's Dark Lords didn't need blood and terror. They worked through networks and economies. Snape hated Voldemort and distrusted Dumbledore. Now he wondered which legacy Ted might belong to. He thought of Grindelwald and wondered why there'd been no news of him recently. Meanwhile, without an archmage to defend it, Shadowfang Keep fell to the swarm of beta players. Pirewood Village went down that night. A dozen players reset characters to 0 when they died. You didn't get do-overs in One Life mode. Ted's plan was working. The players would clear the monsters in the mirrored overlay, the danger would be contained, and the school would remain uninvolved publicly. Ted had slotted the solution into the game economy. Softy, corpse-eating pet, would make clearing the castle easier, pushing players toward the intended path. Perhaps Snape had been right. Ted was a new kind of Dark Lord. Voldemort's violence had been obvious. Ted's power was quieter, more efficient, and no less deadly in its consequences. If Voldemort killed with visible blood, Ted killed with systems, markets, and incentives, a capitalist Dark Lord who inflicted harm without shedding so much as a drop. Happy Halloween. Have a day off. Have a day off. Have a day off. Have a day off. Browsing Jihu is such a waste of time. I need to reflect on this. 396. Some people are like salted duck eggs. Ideal land. The magic world. Closed beta. The Shadowfang Keep dungeon was in full swing. Careful. Ahead is the castle's wolf den, someone warned over voice chat. There are lots of werewolves and ghost wolves. Neville, hold aggro for a bit, and watch your health. There's an Elgao spawn here that can cut half your HP in an instant. Harry glared at Ted. Watch the healer's health closely. If the T goes down, we're finished. Relax, Ted answered a little too brightly. Harry kept his look. Hermione, keep an eye on Ted. If he panics and runs, freeze him with an ice ring on the ground so he can't escape and die first. Would I do that? Ted blushed, offended, then stopped when everyone stared. Last time was an accident. I can't just chew up good gear, can I? A +12 healing staff doesn't grow on trees. This run, Ted had promised himself he would play seriously. He was the group's priest, a pure priest. Almost no offensive power, all about buffs, shields, cleanses, and healing. He'd also set the game on One Life mode for the closed beta. If your character died, that was it. No resurrection, no rolling back levels or equipment. Everyone was extremely cautious. With 10x XP and 10x drop rates, restarting was easy, but One Life mode made every fight tense. Skilled players could still grind a new character to the level cap, 25, in a few hours, but the risk felt real. The last time they'd been in Shadowfang Keep, the raid had collapsed about a third of the way in because of a bug. Seeing the situation as hopeless, Ted had fled. He was supposed to be healing, and he ran. Out of the 6-person team, he alone had bolted. Harry thought if he could, he'd chain Ted to Hermione's belt. The team composition was simple. Neville the Paladin, main tank and aggro, Harry the Warrior, primary physical DPS and backup tank, Jerry the Rogue, scout, lockpicker, single target burst, Ron the Arcane Sorcerer, a warlock branch who summoned arcane constructs, Hermione the Mage, specialist in ice and some arcane for crowd control and AoE, and Ted the Priest. At first, nobody played a pure priest in the game. Without guidance, priests were painfully slow at leveling. Other classes could clear mobs and power level, while priests felt like they were just trading hits. But once leveled, a pure priest was invaluable. Priests had a shadow branch that inverted their toolkit into nasty debuffs, and pure priests could complete an exclusive class quest to learn resurrection. In-game characters resurrected on death, but a priest's resurrection could save you from that loss. At worst, you might lose some XP. That revelation made priests suddenly coveted. Ted had taken it a step further. He'd been studying souls in reality for a while, and the resurrection mechanic was the result of his recent, risky experiments. He couldn't test it on humans, so the game became the perfect lab. Hundreds of in-game deaths a day generated far more data than a few controlled trials. Yesterday, he'd released another 500 closed beta accounts at players' requests, and crafting professions were flourishing. Shamanic potions, alchemy, mechanics, herbology, magical creature care, leatherworking, blacksmithing. Even players who hated combat were finding ways to contribute. Some adventurers simply traveled to scenic locations and posted screenshots. Others tried to recreate in reality the magic they found in-game. The boundary between the virtual and the real had started to blur. Ideal Land had become more than a game. Ted's experiments with virtual souls, his mirror world, meant he could simulate lives, deaths, strength gains, and ability tweaks for the monsters. The werewolves roaming Shadowfang Keep had no awareness they were being adjusted. In their minds, their lives were real. Ted was even attempting to seed fallen souls into the dungeon to create new monsters. Werewolves alone weren't enough anymore. The developers needed bodies to populate encounters. Mid-November usually meant Quidditch season and the school buzzing with activity. This year, though, everyone was glued to Ideal Land. Professor McGonagall had tried policies to pull students away from the game, but policy could only do so much. Quidditch still mattered to some. House teams practiced and grudges flared as always. Gryffindor and Slytherin clashed over pitch time yet again. After practice, a Slytherin had ambushed a Gryffindor girl with a hair-growing spell that sent her looking like a golden-furred monkey, eyebrows a foot long, face covered in hair. Madame Pomfrey sighed, 3 days in the infirmary for the spell to wear off. The school's new pastime and Ted's influence had led to an experimental atmosphere. Students tinkered with spells like hobbyists, improving and iterating. Someone had perfected a hair removal spell, but only after dozens of volunteers went temporarily bald. Then they improved it to spare eyebrows and lashes. The hair-growing spell used in the ambush had been a stronger, reworked version. Duelists suggested countering with a removal spell, but Pomfrey vetoed it. Undoing an applied spell on someone else could be risky. Let it wear off. Word of the ambush spread. Gryffindor challenged Slytherin outright. A fight, or you're a coward. Snape, as usual, materialized when wands were drawn and diffused the situation with that implacable composure that made a dozen Gryffindor witnesses look like a minor annoyance. The Gryffindors demanded a duel. The Slytherins said they were changing the battlefield, massing in Ideal Land at the main city gate where no professors could interfere. By midnight, both sides were trash-talking across the body of the gate city. A crowd of over 100 watched. Alumni, wizards from other countries, and players who came just to see a spectacle. Some students had even taken up cooking as a crafting profession and set up snack stalls. Spiced melon seeds were oddly popular. Ted stood in the crowd with Snape, passing him a handful. Snape tried one, frowned, shrugged, and admitted it sped his magical recovery. He still couldn't fathom how Ted had made Ideal Land, a virtual world stitched together from magic. But he watched with a detached curiosity. After enough bluster and hesitation, nobody wanted to get locked up by guards or lose a character. The two houses agreed on a 5v5 relay. The last one standing wins. Losers must retreat 3 paces. Ted snorted. 3 paces? That's all the way to Hogsmeade. Neville, Gryffindor's opening fighter, yelled with theatrical bravado and charged, sword glowing. He relied on paladin durability and in 10 seconds had slashed down 2 opponents and worn another down. The match de-escalated into lighthearted chaos. Nobody wanted to risk a permanent loss in one life mode. Later that afternoon, the internet-addicted team, the group that had been streaming and posting videos non-stop, finally engaged the dungeon's final boss, Alugao. Ted had designed this boss. It could teleport, cast mass curses, and fire volleys of shadow arrows. The fight lasted 12 minutes of relentless struggle. In the end, 6 of the 7 party players had been tragically defeated, but Alugao fell. Ted had asked Parker, one of the devs, to dial the difficulty down. The open beta was imminent. Parker posted the announcement. The game would update tonight and enter open beta tomorrow. The forums exploded. The boss kill video was stickied. Within minutes, hundreds of comments poured in. Threads multiplied. Players debated the best tactics, complained about friends letting werewolves escape and pulling extra mobs, and posted rumors that the R&D system would open in the next patch, that the virtual world was getting eerily more real. Someone found a hidden quest to gain the favor of an NPC dragon named Red Dragon Anna. The game felt like a living thing. When the servers went down an hour later, the players, the little wizards who'd been imprisoned in the magic world for weeks, blinked into blinding reality. Ted peeled off his game glasses and stared out the window. The forbidden forest was a gray expanse. Most leaves had fallen. He opened the paper crane Hermione had folded and sent. Her little send method was a private joke. The message read, "Not coming tonight. Have to study for an exam next month." Ted frowned. Why not call? Two-way mirrors were so convenient, but text was dramatic. Sometimes tone had more flair. He typed back a theatrical reply, "Seeing your words destroyed me. I dropped my armor and abandoned my weapons. The second I saw your message, I broke into a cold sweat. The world went colorless, like a scion whose tail is grabbed, like an ability user with a sea prism stone, like a Jinchuriki stripped of a tailed beast, like an Ultraman without light." Hermione answered the door instead. "Didn't you say you weren't coming? You said you had to study," Ted started. Surprised, Hermione shrugged off her overskirt. Her cheeks were flushed. She was wearing a daring outfit. "This outfit," Ted blurted. "Do you like it? I bought it at a Muggle lingerie shop." "I like it," he said without thinking. Some people, Ted thought, were like salted duck eggs, plain white on the outside, but the yolk inside runs like oil. Across the globe, far from the silly campus quarrels in Ideal Land, Grindelwald was not idle. In Egypt, he met with the Minister of Magic. The minister kissed Grindelwald's ring with the respect due a visiting dignitary. Around them stood veteran wizards, some in their 70s and 80s, the core leaders of the Saints. While Dumbledore sparred openly with Lord Voldemort, Grindelwald quietly courted power and allies abroad. 397, Yan'an Town, a town of simple folk. On the distant North American continent, a young wizard slipped quietly back into his dormitory, pulled a two-way mirror from beneath several seals, and peered into it. Although Ideal Land's servers had already branched into North America via the Leyline Magic Network, the Magical Congress of the United States had not authorized the service's official launch. Wizards who logged into Ideal Land in the United States were doing so illegally. The Congress's reach was limited, though. If you logged in quietly and didn't make a scene, they usually wouldn't notice. This young wizard, Slotta, was 16 and due to graduate the next year. Because of the Tri-Wizard Tournament livestream, almost every school with a team in the tournament managed to get access to Ideal Land. Ilvermorny, however, had suffered catastrophic losses. Their headmaster was dead, several professors poisoned, and someone had even peeled off a face to impersonate a team leader for the tournament. 7 of Ilvermorny's best students were gone. Although Lord Voldemort had eventually been driven off by Dumbledore and Grindelwald, the damage was done. With the principal dead, professors compromised by Imperio, and the school's treasure, the Serpentwood, taken by Voldemort, Ilvermorny had been left in ruins. Before all this, Voldemort had been known as a notorious dark wizard out of Europe, a name people heard occasionally and shrugged off. Now he was infamous. Slotta was studying under those circumstances. It was like taking online classes for 3 years. The quality of teaching had plummeted. Ilvermorny's instability had deeper roots. North American magic culture had been harsh and insular. The divide between wizards and mundanes bred resentment. Factions within the Magical Congress, conservatives and radicals, argued constantly, and Voldemort excelled at exploiting such fractures. In the past 2 years, other magical organizations had asserted themselves, witch covens, confederations, and a rising class of superhumans, while governments tried to court or control magical power. The influence of the Magical Congress on its home soil had shrunk. Warlords sprouted everywhere. In Europe, things were tense but comparatively stable. In the United States, armed robbers ran across rooftops in daylight, and self-appointed heroes enforced their own brand of justice at night. People kept their doors locked. Authorities coveted magic and probed for any excuse to seize it. In that mess, Ideal Land was a paradise. Slotta and his peers used it to stay in touch with friends overseas, to learn developments across the globe, to find information and companions, to express themselves, and some even fell in love, even if heartbreak followed. Without Ideal Land, life would have been far bleaker. Ted Epiphany and his team had built the world's most successful virtual magic environment, Ted's Magic World. Slotta had stayed up all night refreshing forums, waiting for the open beta, and he jumped in the moment the servers opened. He donned the Ideal Land goggles, sent to him by a foreign netizen, and the mirror filled with a soft white glow. The scene shifted, blue skies and white clouds, endless plains and forests, animals playing on lush grass. A voice chimed, "Welcome, Descender. Welcome to this wondrous magic world. This world is beautiful, but also terrible. You must experience it for yourself. Please select your race." 2 rows of humanoid silhouettes appeared. The Free Alliance's options were on a red background, the Order's on blue. The Free Alliance included unruly, independent races, demi-humans, rabbit ears, dog ears, cows ears, ox horns, free elves, goblins, mountain dwarves, werewolves. The Order faction favored order and structure: humans, demi-humans, nature elves, underdark dwarves, vampires. Each race came with a backstory, bonuses and penalties, and innate abilities. Slotta read the descriptions, deliberating. He eventually chose a dog-eared demi-human from the Free Alliance, born near a forested valley. He'd wanted to try a centaur to run on 4 hooves, but hidden races required special triggers. Ted had hinted those would need to be discovered through play. Next came profession. The closed beta had offered a dozen or so professions and clear guidance on early and late game progression. The open beta added 7 or 8 more, but the system voice warned that the version's level cap was 40. Hitting max level was only the beginning. Complete the endgame quests, and you unlocked free mode, where professions were no longer fixed. Players would shape abilities through learning, training, research, and invention, Ted's way of crowdsourcing magical research. It took Slotta more than half an hour to customize his character. When he spawned, there were already 5 or 6 other dog-eared demi-humans near him, and over 4,600 players online at 1 in the morning. Ted Epiphany watched the metrics and grinned. Daily logins were climbing. 55,000 players logged in every day and stayed at least 2 hours, with a peak concurrent population of 120,000. The International Confederation of Wizards had offered measured support through Dumbledore, but Dumbledore privately advised caution. The Confederation was powerful in name, but fragmented, full of factions and contradictory agendas. One person's plan could be another's enemy. Dumbledore knew its limits and told Ted, essentially, to keep quiet and let it grow. Ted understood the rules of the game. What he wanted most was power, real influence beyond his already considerable skill. At school, he could match anyone except Snape, but now his influence reached worldwide. The changing world was volatile. In the past 2 weeks, Ted had cataloged at least 4 otherworld infiltration incidents. One incident in Cairo had caused a pyramid to appear overnight, accompanied by monstrous creatures. The Egyptian Ministry of Magic's swift, precise response suggested deeper forces at work. Much of North Africa was already under Grindelwald's Saint organization influence, and Grindelwald's reach had grown. Back in the game, knowledge triggers pinged across Ted's console. Ding! Talent, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold, triggered. Discovered, Healing Church Blood Therapy Potion Recipe, blue. The recipe documented the Healing Church's blood therapy potion from Yharnam, a drug requiring advanced blood as a base. Patients who received it experienced strange side effects. The recipe cost 250 experience points to redeem. Ted laughed. A blue-tier knowledge drop for only 250 experience? Too cheap. Advanced blood in Bloodborne was divine blood, but similar techniques could be adapted. The blood of powerful magical creatures diluted into a potion could yield miraculous effects, albeit with risky side effects. The technical novelty wasn't high. The value lay in the method of diluting advanced blood. Ted mused about making a trade with Snape for some rare samples, though he didn't strictly need them. He could transmute blood via alchemy. His research queue was already full. Ted loved the leverage the game gave him. He manipulated small numbers invisibly, reward multipliers, spawn rates, to nudge millions of players' behavior while they believed they were acting freely. The Goblin Lair dungeon, for example, was created from real-world data overlaid into ideal land. Ted seeded it with stories and subtle incentives so players would develop animosity toward goblins. Public opinion, he thought, was a pistol he could fire at will. At the same time, back at Slotta's school, Hogwarts, December brought more mundane pressures. Professor McGonagall, deputy headmistress, convened fifth years about the OWLs, the ordinary wizarding levels, comprehensive exams that would determine future prospects. The atmosphere tightened, revision became relentless, and students with fragile nerves began losing appetite and sleep. Hannah Abbott, nicknamed the Iron Hat King by some, broke down in herbology after misweighing an herb. Her crying spread. At least 3 classmates were brought to tears. They declared themselves unfit for the exams. Ted didn't understand the panic. Even if you became a shut-in after graduation, you could travel by flu and survive. Worries about marriage, housing, and transport seemed trivial to him. Still, students had a duty to study, and many threw themselves into revision. Ron and Jerry studied dutifully, only to find their progress slow. After a week of failed attempts, they gave up in despair. While practicing Defendo, Ron's wand slipped and flew out, striking Jerry's head. Jerry glared at the wand and then at Ron. "Ron, maybe try practicing with throwing knives instead," he muttered. Unprompted, Ted, ever the tinkerer, had been experimenting with a controlled form of sectum sempra, refining it to shape blades and direct physical objects. He'd even demonstrated a translucent alchemical throwing knife that could sever a dummy's head from 10 meters away. The forging technique for those transparent knives had been invented by a rogue player whose sub-profession was forging. Ted toyed with the idea of a quarterly magic forging knife competition where winners would earn huge in-game rewards, another subtle nudge to draw player labor into his ecosystem. Ron, Jerry, and a dozen others abandoned their tutoring sessions to learn the throwing knife trick from Ted. "Please turn, my darling," Ted joked as the blade materialized. Meanwhile, Dolores Umbridge had posted a new educational decree on the Great Hall notice board, strutting her authority. Educational Decree Number 24 read, "No student organizations, associations, teams, clubs, or may exist at Hogwarts without the approval of the Senior Undersecretary, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Professor Umbridge. Any student group of 3 or more meeting regularly was defined as an illegal organization, tutoring groups and revision circles included." Umbridge was using Dumbledore's prolonged absence to tighten control. The school muttered and maneuvered, the game world expanded, and outside both, real-world politics and otherworld anomalies fanned the embers of a much larger fire. Slotta logged out that night with a head full of spells and a heart full of curiosity, unaware of how intertwined the virtual and the real were becoming, or how much of the next few years would depend on choices made inside a game designed to teach, to test, and to steer an entire generation. Chapter 383, Chaos is Coming. Umbridge had never been clever. If she had been, she wouldn't have made herself so universally loathed. From the moment she began her career, she had flattered and sacrificed herself to her superiors in the hope of gaining patronage, an obsequiousness that had even unnerved the old men. Whether at the ministry or at Hogwarts, there were 10 times as many people who despised her as those who tolerated her. And yet she had risen to the rank of senior investigator and a senior ministry official. The reason was simple. While she lacked brilliance, she was ruthlessly determined. People fear the indecisive far less than they fear the resolutely cruel. A fool who cannot follow through is not dangerous. A ruthless fool, however, is terrifying because his audacity can surprise everyone. If luck favored him, he might achieve things beyond his talents. If luck did not, well, there would be another life to be smarter in. When Umbridge was first sent to Hogwarts by Minister Fudge, she had convinced herself that he trusted her, that she had been given a mission to seize the school from Dumbledore or at least secure influence for the ministry. After 3 months, she finally understood the truth. Dumbledore had been entwined with this school for 60, maybe 70 years. No one could take Hogwarts from him. She had been sent more as a nuisance, a way to make trouble, to rile Dumbledore. In that light, her position was precarious. If she failed to accomplish anything, once Dumbledore reasserted himself, she would lose the post she had dangled everything for. If expelled from Hogwarts, she would find it hard to establish herself in the ministry. Ordinary people might have given up. Umbridge did not. Her ambition, born in her school days, had flamed hotter with each passing year. She could tolerate humiliation and humiliation's price, but never the extinction of her ambition. So she pushed harder. If the struggle was not yet over, she would struggle with everything she had. No one would destroy her by simple means, not even Dumbledore. That month, she requested 6 educational decrees from the ministry, more than she had in the previous 10 years combined. Minister Fudge watched with pleasure. He understood her temperament, and wanted to see just how much he could use someone like her. If it worked for him, fine. If not, he had given her the opportunity. The blame would not fall entirely on him. Ted, who often heard about Fudge through Barty, could only sigh at the minister's political shrewdness. If Dumbledore advanced by unlocking higher levels of magical prowess, Fudge had been advancing along a political path, becoming more skillful, more cold-blooded, more comfortable sacrificing expendable subordinates as pawns. That is the playbook of a seasoned politician. But this world was not ordinary, and politicians often looked ridiculous when order cracked. Chaos was coming. Umbridge's conduct at Hogwarts grew increasingly outrageous and mostly ineffective in a technical sense. Her decrees and raids simply bred resentment among students and faculty, making more people hate her but feel powerless. She tried repeatedly to storm Ted's secret base, attempting to arrest the little wizards for violating educational decrees and holding illegal gatherings. She hoped by controlling Ted and his circle to make herself feared. Other students could be cowed. Ted and his friends were not. After 2 attempts to break into the secret base, Umbridge spent a week in the infirmary. The first raid had ended in humiliation. Her feet had slipped like they had been greased, and she and her lackeys retreated bruised and embarrassed, seeking remedies from Madame Pomfrey. The second time, only Umbridge insisted on going. Her underlings refused. No one wanted to be the one who antagonized Ted. Still, they were forced to lead the way. The result of that second attempt was worse. 7 people, including Umbridge, returned with dozens of large red and purple welts on their faces, burning and maddeningly itchy. Madame Pomfrey could do little. Umbridge ended up in St. Mungo's, where 3 days of treatment only lessened the symptoms. Back at Hogwarts, she tried to charge Ted with attacking teachers and students with dark arts, but Professor McGonagall flatly refused to support the move. "Professor Umbridge," McGonagall warned, "for your own safety, you would be wise not to rush about like a headless chicken. This school has stood 1,000 years. Some places are dangerous. Perhaps next time the injuries won't be so minor." Ted visited Peeves that very day. "Peeves, how have you been? I haven't seen you causing much trouble lately. You haven't turned respectable, have you?" "Impossible. The great Peeves is planning something even bigger." "Good," Ted said. "There's someone in the school everyone hates. She's ripe for a prank." Through a back door of the secret base, Ted lowered the defenses and cut the magical power supply on Umbridge's office to the bare minimum. Then he left the rest to Peeves. If anyone deserved a long, slow torment, it was that woman. It was also time to mobilize the students. Illegally prohibiting gatherings? Fine. Then they would organize resistance. Humiliate and oppress students under the banner of status? They would repay such bullying with collective strength. From then on, Umbridge suffered. Strange things began to happen during lessons and in the corridors. Buckets of ice water tipped over as she entered, banana peels sent her flying, and shoes were magically flung loose. Traps lay on the podium. One wrong step, and a mousetrap would clamp her heel. A seemingly ordinary blackboard eraser proved to be a transformed toad that made obscene noises and, when picked up, would swell and lick her face. Wherever she went, students whispered and pointed subtly. Her shoes croaked like toads with every step. When she tried to punish students, dozens volunteered to be the culprit, eager to take detention as if it were an honored expedition. They cheered and applauded when chosen. Detention became a badge of solidarity rather than shame. When a movement forms, it spreads until it is inescapable. Umbridge had also come to believe the thing she feared most, that Dumbledore was using students to raise an army for himself and rule all wizards. That notion had not come from Fudge explicitly. It was the pressure that made Umbridge see conspiracies and grand designs everywhere. Peeves, whose powers were born of student emotions and pent-up magic, grew bolder against her, and his magic increased when he faced her. Nights became unbearable. She woke to dozens of toads crawling from under the covers, or to find a pig's tail pinned to her back with the words, "I am a pure pig," stuck to her robes. She developed dark circles ill-suited to her prim features and came close to a breakdown. Yet she endured. Rather than retreat, Umbridge redoubled her efforts, pressuring wavering students to join her, stirring up petty rivalries and inciting factions to oppose one another. She used her title as a professor and her ministry connections to gather a cohort of students who wanted to make a difference. Parents, seeing a teacher exerting influence and bearing ministry rank, judged it a form of healthy competition. For a time, the rules allowed her to do this, but rules only hold where order still reigns. Across other worlds, and even in the ideal land, incursions and disturbances multiplied. Chaos was coming, and the storm grew stronger. Late December arrived in a blur. The tense atmosphere at Hogwarts eased for the holidays. Many students prepared to go home, others prepared for the festival. Christmas was the great Western festival. No one could pretend it was just another day. Even Umbridge, shrewd enough to mask her venom, arrived at the Great Hall with a brittle smile and bulk-bought gifts. She kept the peace. To ruin Christmas would have made everyone into enemies. Some who had disliked her saw the gift as a sign of authority and returned politeness. Others remained unimpressed. It was all part of the struggle. Ted put away the presents he had been given and checked the gifts he had prepared. He liked them himself and was sure his friends would too. For Hermione, he had compiled a book called Useful Magic, summarized by Ted. Practical, systematic spells of ice, fire, and arcane arts meant to help her build an effective magic system. Because Hermione had been rigorously increasing her magical power, power was no longer a weakness for her. Now it could be an advantage, and these high-cost spells would be useful. For Neville, Ted had brewed a bottle of Felix Felicis. The ingredients were rare, the brewing delicate. One batch took 2 months, and one mistake wasted everything. A bottle provided 24 hours of +4 luck, indispensable for risky travel, urgent tasks, or desperate gambits. Ted hoped it would help Neville, the school's golden boy, tilt fortune his way. Harry received a new style wand. Ted had tried making several wands, and most had flaws, but this one fit her well. Its core incorporated mithril and goblin silver, and the shaft was forged of tungsten steel. It had been consecrated using Harry's blood. Normally the wand looked like any other, but in battle it could change size, an extendable magic baton. It had strong magic attachment and amplification properties. When Harry poured herself into it, she could form a massively condensed club, nearly a meter across and more than 10 meters long. A single swing could cleave a trench and send tremors felt 200 meters away. In Ted's words, it was a sort of Rui Jingu Bang. Ron's gift was a pseudo-philosopher's stone, a semi-finished alchemical device Ted had created. It could convert 1 galleon of gold per day and serve as a secondary energy source for a magical construct. Ted had inherited some of Nicholas Flamel's knowledge and through his own steel alchemy, improved on it. He could not produce a true philosopher's stone, only an experimental failure that still had great utility. Jerry received 2 iron plates, accompanied by instructions. Infuse them with magic daily, and they would take the shape of a throwing knife in his mind. They were a kind of magical nanomaterial that changed form on command, mentally guided alloys. Jerry, already talented with throwing knives and shadow techniques, would find their maneuverability far superior to ordinary enchanted knives. Malfoy was given a string of prayer beads carved from Bodhi root, meant to calm and steady the mind. This year, he had suffered under the blow of his father's unfortunate demise and the pressure of expectation. Ted hoped the beads might grant him a bit of peace. Training in noble houses had always been brutal. Hagrid received a dragon egg from the black market. Professor McGonagall's present was a long, off-white wool-blend coat made by Muggles that suited her, down to the expression on her face. Professor Flitwick got a Swiss watch, a tasteful gold Rolex. Fleur received a mind-shielding brooch that would dull the immediate impact of her extraordinary charm, and Ted teased Hermione about it at once. Hermione's return gift to Fleur was a hand-knitted, pleasantly scented fuzzy scarf. Ted wasn't sure what animal's fur it was, but he accepted it with a grin. On Christmas night, Ted sang carols, conjured a shower of ribbons and sweets, and transfigured 4 girls into a spirited quartet of little swans. The great hall erupted, the rafters ringing as if the transparent ceiling might be lifted off. Umbridge sat at the professor's table, knife and fork clutched, watching Ted while leaning away from Hagrid's broad backside. For the first time, she admitted something to herself. She could not defeat this boy within the school. When he sang, even her resentment and disgust dimmed. How could she hope to compete with his talents and the affection he inspired? He would become someone important. There was no point in destroying him. So she shifted her aim. If she could not be rid of him, perhaps she could find another way up. Perhaps she could replace McGonagall. It was a desperate, cunning plan, and for someone like Umbridge, it was the sort of scheme that counted as hope. 399. Stabbed the ninja den? Ted hadn't expected Christmas to bring a sudden surge of players to Magic World. Apparently, a lot of people had given the game as a Christmas gift to friends and family. By now, most players had settled into routines and were beginning to appreciate the depth and realism of Magic World. Many wizards used the game to visit distant friends and relatives face to face. Others spent leisure time wandering pleasant landscapes where birds sang and flowers bloomed. Players pursued hobbies, cooking, tailoring, blacksmithing, farming. Anything hard to achieve in the real world could be tried in the game. Some even grew man-eating plants and, when they couldn't feed them, led wandering players to take a nap under the blossoms. People with physical disabilities could re-experience wholeness. A surprising number admitted the real world felt inferior. Here, everyone could be normal. To prevent players from starving in-game, Ted had installed an anti-addiction system that capped continuous online time at 15 hours. Those were the casual players. On the other end were the adventurers, monster slayers, questers, achievement chasers, the ones who pleased NPCs and dominated battlegrounds. Because so many players immersed themselves in the world, the generated spirit power skyrocketed. Parker took advantage of the surplus and refined the NPC programming. These characters developed personalities, memories, quirks, intelligent NPCs that often felt indistinguishable from real people. Forums filled with heated debate. Some players poured effort into maximizing NPC affinity and even fantasized about more intimate interactions. Others were horrified. Arguments became so intense, offline meetups almost broke out. One side insisted on a basic human bottom line. The other insisted in sexual freedom. As long as we don't hurt anyone, who are you to judge? The results were ridiculous enough that Ted had Parker tweak the favorability rising difficulty behind the scenes. He hoped those hot-blooded players would cool off. Despite the minor issues, the player boom was a huge boon. Ted had already run more than a dozen small experiments using Magic World and collected an enormous dataset he couldn't have produced alone. Now, dozens of wizards volunteered to run experiments for him. The whole process was recorded. Ted felt like a boss pillaging a university database. Absurdly, he enjoyed it. Spirit power overflowed. The spirit crystals Ted had made were nearly bursting. He reinvested the surplus into the ideal land and established a spirit magic net. These spirit nets sat at the core of the ideal land's logic. Their coverage, combined with his geomantic magic net and the ideal land itself, gave Ted near backdoor control over covered areas, like having map hacks and admin access rolled into one. The triple layer, geomantic magic net, ideal land, spirit magic net, would let Ted become something beyond an ordinary wizard without raising alarms. Quietly, in comfortable water, players would adapt, depend, praise, and never want to leave the net. Hundreds of thousands of players already thanked Ted for changing their lives. A good ruler triumphs without a great reputation, he thought. If everyone knew you were the Dark Lord, what use? Voldemort and Grindelwald's crude methods were beneath him. Beyond spirit power, the sheer number of monsters slain by players generated experience for Ted. Each individual gain was tiny, but with hundreds of thousands of monsters dying daily, the experience added up. Sitting idle in the ideal land, Ted now drew over 1,000 experience points a day, 30,000 a month. This is the right way to level, he chuckled. Mobilize the masses. Much can be accomplished through many hands. Christmas passed. Near the new year, a system notification chimed. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge triggered. Discovered. Akatsuki Ninjutsu Scroll. The Akatsuki Ninjutsu Scroll recorded secret techniques from the ninja world, many requiring profound ninjutsu and sealing jutsu knowledge. It could be redeemed for 990 experience points. Ted redeemed it without hesitation. Less than 1,000 experience was nothing. The scroll listed several techniques: Phantom Body Technique, Phantom Dragon 9 Seals, Samsara of the Transmigrated World, Rain Tiger at Will Technique, and the 5 Seal Barrier. Phantom Body projected blurry images over long distances, useful for displays or virtual meetings. Phantom Dragon 9 Seals was powerful, a ninjutsu that extracted chakra from tailed beasts and channeled it into a ten-tails husk, an effective way to siphon vast magical energy. Samsara of the transmigrated world could create a temporary clone of the caster, remotely controllable and bearing a portion of the caster's strength, useful but limited. Rain Tiger at will generated localized rain, and by weaving subtle energy into the rainfall, sensed all energy changes within the area, an impressive large-scale monitoring tool. The 5-seal barrier was a sealing jutsu requiring 5 simultaneous breaks to lift. Ted reviewed his recent work on sealing techniques and smiled. Now that sealing jutsu had reached the practical stage, he could add it into the game and let players experiment. Based on the damaged seal scroll and combining sealing jutsu with human alchemy, he planned to fix the ideal land terminal problem. At present, a two-way mirror acted as a terminal to connect to the ideal land, like a phone or a computer. But the external device was inconvenient, and in regions where two-way mirrors hadn't been authorized, commissions and fees were outrageous. Smuggling solved the issue, but was a hassle, and mirrors could be confiscated. Ted, as the primary beneficiary, couldn't accept those obstacles. The solution? Magic Net Terminal, Magic Tattoo. Imprinted on the body, it would let players connect to the magic net at any time unless blocked. It worked like embedding a phone chip in flesh and was normally invisible. Who could take it from you? Removing it? Why would anyone want to remove it? The idea had been inspired, ironically, by Voldemort's Dark Mark. Voldemort's mark couldn't be removed, so why should his emblem be removable? While Ted plotted promotion strategies for the magic tattoo, chaos erupted in the Far East. It started as rumors on the forum from local players, then Muggle News reported large-scale riots on the 4 islands of Dongying. The game inside Dongying had exploded. Their ancient Onmyo Ryo was nearly wiped out, and the contemporary Great Onmyoji had been beheaded in a thick fog by a man called Oni. Divinations identified him as an otherworld visitor, someone who had come from another world, like Ryan in Paris. This one had beheaded the highest authority in Dongying's magic world and escaped. A strange organization then appeared on the islands and took in that Oni. The Dongying magic world had fought them, even breaking the statute of secrecy, and lost. Divinations later suggested that members of the organization were all from other worlds. The International Confederation of Wizards began assembling forces from Europe and gathering in Dongying. This was terrifying. Ryan's actions in Paris had been a disaster already. A solitary otherworld visitor had nearly destroyed a city of millions. If more otherworld visitors arrived, and some were clearly hostile, the consequences would be unthinkable. Ted dug for first-hand information and found a photo of the Oni who assassinated the great Onmyoji. He stared. Zabuza Momochi? No wonder he'd been receiving Ninja World knowledge lately. Had the worlds crossed? Could this strange organization be Akatsuki? After more digging, Ted obtained sketches of the new group. He breathed easier. They were strange-looking, certainly not normal, but they didn't match Akatsuki. No black robes with red clouds. Thank goodness. If Akatsuki had begun an Eye of the Moon plan while he was rolling out the spirit magic net, it would have been disastrous. But the world was changing fast. With such a disturbance in Dongying, keeping everything secret might be impossible. Ted redoubled his efforts. He checked his own status. Had he leveled recently? Better to level up. System: upgrade Mind Mage, 2 levels. Level 9 required 36,000 experience, and level 10 required 45,000, totaling 81,000. With the 10% discount, it came to 72,900. The upgrade granted +1 perception, +1 spirit, and +2 levels of magic resistance. Becoming a higher-level Mind Mage made handling spirit power effortless. It let Ted manage the accumulating spirit energy without risking catastrophe. Less than 100,000 experience remained in the pool. After 2 days of adapting to the surge and gathering more experience, he could level again. Mind Mage level 12 would also unlock a new talent. By then, Ted would be walking on 2 legs, both wizard and mage. While Ted expanded his spirit magic net, Dumbledore hadn't been idle either. After 2 or 3 years of contemplation and experimentation, he had finally crossed a barrier that had blocked him. He had reached the ceiling of the world's current power level and was about to become the first level 21, an impending legend. Voldemort and Grindelwald were busy as well. Neville had dreamed of Voldemort clutching something gleefully, an orc warlock, likely someone from Azeroth accidentally stranded here from another timeline. Herbs from Azeroth, like Peacebloom, had appeared before in this world, suggesting previous contact. Voldemort's delight at capturing a green-skinned warlock came from learning warlock lore. Voldemort had always scorned summoning unknown otherworldly demons for the risks, but warlock research into souls opened a dangerous, attractive door. While Dumbledore climbed to new heights, Voldemort studied relentlessly, preparing to ascend. Grindelwald, meanwhile, led an expedition into a newly appeared pyramid in Cairo. The world was changing in unpredictable ways, and everyone with power or curiosity was moving. Ted kept working on spirit nets, seals, tattoos, and leveling up, while the ripples from otherworld visitors and new knowledge kept reshaping the balance. Ding, otherworld knowledge triggered. Discovered. Akatsuki ninjutsu scroll. 400. If there are thousands of locks on the door, there must be a prince living here. Cairo was roaring with life. In the days since a mysterious pyramid, bigger than Khufu's, had suddenly appeared, tourists had poured into the city by the thousands. Hotels and guest houses were booked solid. 30 kilometers outside the city, strings of camels laden with excited visitors creaked along the road like a caravan from another age. But the local government had clamped down on access to the site to protect cultural relics. Visitors could only watch from several hundred meters away. Approaching was forbidden. Soldiers with guns patrolled the perimeter. Wealthy, pale-skinned Western tourists grumbled, but the authorities stood firm. The locals, as always, turned restriction into opportunity. Not far from the cordon, they set up a makeshift market. Camels, tents, mobile homes, full of the exotic trappings tourists wanted: fruit, street food, drinks, local garments, acrobats, fire breathers, knife throwers, and even snake charmers. Fortune tellers, tarot readers, and amulet stalls clustered together. It felt like stepping into an Aladdin bazaar. Belly dancers performed on a stone stage. Tourists cheered and tossed coins. The whole scene smelled of spice, money, and spectacle. Among the crowd, someone familiar watched the dancers, but his eyes kept scanning the stalls. Slada, an American wizard, had come all this way for one purpose: to surprise an online girlfriend he'd met in the virtual world of Ideal Land. He'd become a minor celebrity there, popular on the forums, his magic skill improved, ranked high in the exams, and infuriatingly to some, he'd fallen for an Egyptian player in the game. He hadn't told her he was coming. He wanted to surprise her. Ideal Land had rules. Ted, the game's architect, refused to allow a full consummation mechanic. Clothes could be stripped to near nothing, but not removed completely. Players had protested, but Ted didn't want the virtual world to create new, uncontrollable recombinant realities. The game's magic ran on the power of the mind. The world itself behaved like an emergent wizard. If players could breed in-game, or players and NPCs could spawn children, the designers would be creating unpredictable, possibly dangerous emergent phenomena. So dating was allowed, up to a point. To young players, it felt like permanent teasing, always on the edge. Taking advantage of a vacation, Slada had crossed the ocean to meet his online lover. He tracked her by their chats. She'd been posing as a muggle fortune teller in the market to earn pocket money. Slada smiled at his luck, then paused when he noticed another familiar figure moving through the crowd. Her silver hair had been dyed black and veiled to blend in, but her emerald eyes still shone like a clear spring. A brooch at her throat muted the radiance that could otherwise draw attention. It was a gift from Ted that let her move unnoticed when needed. This was Fleur, now a junior official on assignment with the French Ministry of Magic, leading a few rookies on official business in Cairo. France still wielded heavy influence across parts of Africa, with recent Paris incidents prompting closer cooperation between magical and mundane authorities. The French magical authorities had every reason to send representatives. Fleur had been sampling local food and observing the situation for days. Something about the pyramid smelled wrong. In addition to Muggle troops, the local Egyptian Ministry of Magic had placed real wizards on guard, and wizards from other countries had been kept at bay. If there was nothing suspicious, the authorities wouldn't have been so heavy-handed. That, more than anything, had drawn Fleur in. The Egyptian Ministry of Magic itself hid in a 15th century building in Cairo. Egypt being one of the ancient birthplaces of magic, its heritage remained powerful. But in recent decades, internal strife and external interference had weakened it, and Grindelwald and his followers, the Saints, had infiltrated key departments. Grindelwald had a subtler, more strategic mind than Voldemort, less brash, more long game, and he had seized control with practiced ease. A few opposing wizard factions remained, but most of the ministry answered to him. He intended to use Egypt as a staging ground to extend his influence across Africa, first by securing Ouagadougou and then consolidating the continent. The sudden appearance of the pyramid ruined some of those plans. It drew outsiders in. Archaeologists, antiquities dealers, intelligence operatives, adventurers, and, of course, wizards from across the globe. Great powers, Britain, France, the United States, Italy, Germany, and private groups all seemed to have an interest. History had taught colonial powers to claim ancient treasures in foreign lands. Now they used tourism and academic cover to flood Cairo. Magic World factions also arrived in force. Grindelwald could control local officials with spells, but he couldn't simply ignore thousands of foreign wizards and the transnational organizations that had their own agendas. The Goblin Revenge Army sent consolidated excavation teams. From the United States, a powerful corporation called the Vought Group had dispatched operatives. They'd already brawled with local wizards and caused trouble. Local wizard factions opposed to the ministry saw an opening to stir dissent and try to get inside the pyramid. Astrologer wizards from across the region claimed their charts promised riches inside. Before long, the site became a cauldron of competing interests. Slada's romantic surprise quickly turned sour. His online girlfriend, an Egyptian witch from a family aligned with the ministry's opposition, was pulled into local political machinations. The appearance of the pyramid had pushed the opposition to more aggressive plans, entice the ruling faction out and ambush them, or use the chaos to seize power. With her expertise on pyramids and her family connections, Slada's girlfriend was coerced into joining a tomb raiding team. Slada objected and tried to resist. He was beaten and dragged along. Neither of them could refuse without risking their lives. Fleur, meanwhile, had stumbled into a different kind of opportunity. A powerful organization, neither fully Muggle nor fully magical, had broken through the dual protections around the pyramid and forced entry. That breach set everything off. Dozens of factions piled in, official wizards, rogue groups, Muggle gangs who'd slipped past the lines, corporate operatives, and treasure hunters. Grindelwald, watching the chaos with a terse amusement, decided to cut off exits and trap the lot of them inside. If he could detain them all, he thought, he could neutralize opponents and seize any artifacts. Inside, the pyramid defied expectations. It contained strange murals, gold and silver, and artifacts unlike any known Egyptian dynasty. Space within the structure seemed distorted. What stood outside as a single massive tomb housed an interior many times larger than the exterior suggested. The entrance chambers were filled with treasure, but murals hinted at something darker beneath. Below ground, a perfectly symmetrical inverted pyramid extended deep into the earth. According to the paintings, it had been built to imprison a condemned criminal. Even more disturbingly, the subterranean levels reportedly held powerful magical items, 2 tomes, the murals claimed, capable of resurrecting the dead and elevating the living toward godhood. Over 150 people had gone in, representing nearly a dozen factions. The situation was a powder keg. Wizards and muggles, archaeologists and gangsters, corporate soldiers and occultists. None of them had expected the pyramid to be so structured, and none expected that it might actually be occupied. Ted had been following the live reports online, hungry for photos and first-hand accounts. Then a terse message arrived from Grindelwald. Your little girlfriend has entered the pyramid and seems to be in trouble. Ted froze. He tried Hermione, but she was in her dorm doing yoga, winding down for the night. Ted sent a few calming words and then pinged Grindelwald back, then realized with a jolt that by your little girlfriend, Grindelwald meant Fleur. The drama had just gotten very personal.